Chapter 647. A haunted house. For most people, it was a place that did not exist in reality. The absurd thing was that most people who came to the haunted house did not actually want to see ghosts. This kind of strange mentality was really too subtle. Perhaps it was because they realized that everything was fake, like a dream that they would eventually wake up from, that they could immerse themselves in this temporary horror and experience a rare sense of excitement and surprise. But thinking about it this way, he felt that it was the same as the cooking demon competition. It was also a shortcut to hell. In the gloomy, haunted house, Huaisher looked around calmly, his mind still free to wander. Although it was fake, the atmosphere gave him a rare sense of intimacy. It was like coming to a cozy hotel that allowed people to fully relax. It was not actually a hotel. It was a hospital. The visitors were purposely separated from the front and back, so they could not group together to disperse the loneliness and fear. They could only explore the dust-covered, abandoned building with their companions. The dim, flickering light, the strange stains on the ground that had long dried, and the traces of scratching and struggle on the walls. Pain was written everywhere. It was like the diary of a 16-year-old literary teenager. Looking at it did not feel scared, but a sense of shame. So cute. Huaisher looked at the electrotherapy chair covered in blood and sighed softly. Huh, Jean, she was confused. I mean, the designer of this place is so gentle. Miss Huaiji smiled. If only a really sunken place could be so quiet. Wasn't there something wrong with it? Jean, she felt like there were 100,000 question marks in her head. What happened to being scared? Didn't she say that she would shiver in his arms? Why did Miss Huaiji feel like she had entered a sanatorium after entering the haunted house? Even the air seemed fresh. Was this place not scary? She pulled open the cabinet and looked at the bloody, severed hand inside. She fell in a deep thought. To be honest, this is really scary, right? Could it be that Miss Huaiji is afraid of different types? That's right. Some people might not be afraid of corporeal monsters like zombies and monsters. Instead, they might be afraid of ghosts. Hearing the faint screams of other tourists in front of her, Makoto quietly clenched her small fists, full of expectation. Staff, please do your best. Let Miss Huaiji see the power of the Ingzhou demons. After passing through the dilapidated hall, they entered the sick room where props and corpses were hung. Finally, the main event was here. The morgue. The morgue, what a horrible place. It was the resting place of the dead, the place with the highest number of supernatural stories, and, at the same time, the source of terror in many people's nightmares. Oh, this chilliness, the air conditioner must be very strong, right? Those staff members who were lying on the ground, pretending to be corpses, must be having a hard time, right? Please try your best to scare Miss Huaiji. Filled with anticipation for the haunted house, Makoto grabbed Miss Hanakami's hand and walked into the thick fog that rushed at them. The cage is opening. The cage is opening. The bird in the cage wants to escape. There seemed to be a faint singing in her ears, echoing in this silent corridor like crying and complaining. And in the singing, traces of scarlet blood seeped out from the wall, bringing with them the unique sweet smell of fresh blood. It was like pairs of eyes opened on the pale wall, staring at Makoto with empty eyes. The souls wandering in the wall were singing loudly. The cage is opening. The cage is opening. The bird in the cage wants to escape. Makoto's eyes widened in shock. That's amazing. Is this the surround sound of the reality realm? And the blood on the wall, it looks real. And the eyes on the wall, they look real too. They can even blink when you poke them. The haunted house is amazing. Miss Huaiji, look. She turned around in surprise, wanting to show her discovery to her companions. But she realized that there was no one behind her. That familiar figure had disappeared without her noticing. Only a strange silhouette slowly emerged from the pungent fog, slowly walking toward her. The sad singing echoed in the silent corridor. It made Makoto freeze on the spot. They were singing softly, softly asking questions in her ears. Just before dawn, who was the person looking at you from behind? The cage is opening. The cage is opening. The bird in the cage wants to escape. The moment the singing began, Huaisher felt that something was wrong. Everyone's origin substance fluctuations disappeared, as if they had left in an instant. The entire haunted house was sealed off by darkness. Something is wrong here. When he finally confirmed this, he clenched his cold, trembling hand, feeling as if his sharp nails were about to cut into his palm. There was no warmth at all. When he turned around, he saw that Makoto, who was holding his hand, had at some point become a pale, strange figure with her head lowered. A pair of scarlet eyes looked up from her jet-black hair, staring venomously at Miss Huaikiki, who was right in front of her. In an instant, she lunged at him. Then, Huaisher raised his hand and pushed forward. With a low, muffled sound, the arm that brushed past the strange woman's head pressed against the wall. A huge force leaked out, leaving deep cracks in the wall. Countless specks of dust fell, landing on the lifeless, distorted face. Such an intimate cabinet, but it didn't make the other party feel any warmth. There was no bashfulness, only the horror of being trampled by a giant elephant. Even ghosts had the talent to seek advantages and avoid disadvantages. Otherwise, why would they always scare children and bully little girls? Why not look for retired soldier kings and fierce men who returned from 10 years of military service to find their daughters living in a doghouse? The soft persimmon in her imagination was like a transformer, instantly changing into a grenade that was close at hand. Even the crazed remnant spirit felt an instant of shock and fear. Then, she saw the darkness behind Huaisher, as well as countless hungry and ferocious scarlet eyes in the darkness. The blade of hatred swept past, and in an instant, the strange figure disappeared without a trace. Even the original white clothes were not left behind, devoured by the thirsty crows. That's it. Huaisher scratched his head and looked behind him. He couldn't see any trace of Zhenshi, but he could sense her condition. Since he suspected that there might be something wrong with the haunted house, Huaisher naturally wouldn't forget to plant eyes on his employer. There were 2 elegant transformed crows hiding in the balloon in her hand. Because of this, he could feel a sense of absurdity. Zhenshi's mood seemed to be as calm as usual, even excited and surprised. That silly girl. Don't tell me she thinks she's still in haunted house. That's enough. But since he could confirm that she wouldn't be in any danger for a while, then he could deal with everything in front of him without worry. Just behind the open door in front of Huaisher, in the real morgue, all the cabinets suddenly shook violently. The sharp sound of the cabinets rubbing against each other kept bursting out. The dead, sleeping in the low temperature, opened their eyes again. They wriggled their rapidly mutating limbs, like spiders, using their hands and feet to crawl slowly between the walls and the ceiling. Pale faces were raised at strange angles. The empty eyes reflected the lonely figure of Tsuko in their arms. High-pitched screams. At this moment, at this place, everything in a haunted house had been quickly sealed off the moment the secret device was activated, becoming completely different from the real world. Artificial miniature hell, magic hour. All the scenes in the visitor's nightmares crawled out of the illusion and crawled toward Huaisher. Sticky blood rain dripped from the ceiling bit by bit, falling into Huaisher's hands, quickly rotting, drying, and turning into dull dust. The smell of the corpse mixed with the antiseptic became stronger and stronger. Huaisher couldn't help but nod in praise. That's more like it. A good performance. Unfortunately, there are too few people. Well, at least hire a few more extras. In his hand, the hilt of the blade of resentment turned slightly, and with a shake of his wrist, it swept forward with a shrill sound. The violently trembling blade was like the hungry mouths of countless crow, instantly sweeping through the corpse in front of him. Then, several pieces of tragic wreckage fell to the ground. The uneven gap was like the mark of being pecked by a bird's beak. It was still spasming, but it quickly turned into mist. The mist couldn't dissipate because long before that, the crow buried in the sanctuary had already eaten happily. They didn't let go of a trace. Holy, holy, holy! The crow praised excitedly, vaguely expressing, although the taste is average, this free buffet is good, not enough, more autumn pear cream. In short, a bunch of messy food. Surrounded by the corpses, Huaisher suddenly became worried. These guys eat so much every day. What if in the future they become like the fat horse at home, too fat to fly? But he couldn't care so much. Children should eat more when they are still growing. Therefore, amidst the screams of the corpses, Miss Paper raised her head, revealing a happy smile, and expressed her gratitude to the monsters in front of her. Ashy, 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 ashy. The loud sound of iron crystal proliferation burst out in an instant, rapidly extending from the length of the tachi. The blade of resentment was growing, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a huge scale that almost filled the entire morgue. 453 meters. In the darkness, the ugly who peeped at the stab froze on the spot in disbelief. What the hell was that? It was just like the iron poles erected between the walls, humming with resentment, overflowing with ferocious blood and cold light. Now, with Huaisher's movements, the huge sharp blade slowly lifted and then began to violently spin. The last thing that could be heard was a crisp click. That was the sound of Huaisher closing the door behind him. It was as if he had pressed the switch of a juicer. A mournful howl burst out, swallowing everything. It wasn't limited to the hilt. Huaisher's fleeting figure moved forward in an instant. He raised a finger, propped up the fulcrum of the blade of resentment, and guided and pulled the violent blade to begin to spin. The storm began at this moment. The high-pitched screams of the crows overlapped in one place and spread out with a bang. Countless mournful blood sprayed in all directions, dyeing everything in a ferocious scarlet color. Slash, slash, slash. It wasn't as stiff and rigid as imagined. Instead, it was so nimble that it could drive people crazy. In the violent spin, the blade that had almost turned into a wheel kept shrinking and extending, freely changing its size. With the push of Huaisher's palm, it changed its angle and wandered to every corner of the enclosed space. Countless deep slash marks were left on the walls, iron cabinets, dissection tables, and even the bodies of the monsters. It slaughtered the ghosts at an unparalleled speed. Just like the propaganda of every high-end wall-breaking machine, it broke the barrier between every cell membrane and fully squeezed out every trace of nutrients in the food. It was an endless ravage, until all humans gathered in one place and turned into a cup of nutritious and healthy juice. When the terrifying spin came to an abrupt end, there was no complete object in the room except for the blood-stained figure. Even after being chopped into pieces, the undead monsters could still get up and continue to fight. However, in this exquisite destruction of the millimeter scale, they also welcomed the literal meaning of not even their bones were left behind. What kind of monster was that? In the gap of darkness, the ninja codenamed Ugly was shocked by the tragic scene. It was unbelievable. The dark secret instrument that he was so proud of, the endless zombie march, was destroyed so easily. Now, he no longer had any courage to fight. Only endless fear surged in his heart, devouring his reason and soul. He wanted to escape impatiently. He must tell Ko, must tell the others, what the hell they had awakened. But right at that moment, an ice-cold hand pressed down on his shoulder. It was so gentle. A beautiful face stained with blood slowly peeked out from behind his shoulder, looking at his distorted face, smiling sweetly, whispering softly in his ear, "I found you." Chapter 648. Found you, it was soft and joyful, as if the game of hide-and-seek was over. The blood-soaked devil rose from the darkness and moved forward from behind. She raised her hands and pressed them on Chao's shoulders. Her beautiful and horrible face looked forward and studied her face. She smiled. Her dark eyes seemed to be filled with the essence of the abyss, with a ferocious light. When she was stared at by that pair of eyes, all her courage quickly collapsed, because there was endless darkness rising and swallowing everything. It was like the suppression from the top of the food chain. Under the gentle touch of that pair of palms, all her strength collapsed. Cho was stunned in place, her lips trembling. She only felt that her whole body was quickly stiff, and it was difficult for her to move. She could only feel that the pair of palms on her shoulders slowly groped upward, touching her skin and sweat little by little. From her neck up, it gently stroked her cheeks, mouth, nose, and eyes. It explored the texture and the division of bones. It was like a hairdresser preparing his work. In her ear, it asked gently, "What's your name?" The voice was not majestic or cold, just like a friendly greeting when strangers met for the first time. It even introduced herself. "My name is Motoko Kaishimi. What about you? What's your name?" The low and deep voice echoed in her consciousness and soul. It was like an iron rod turning her brain, spreading waves of fear and pain. It tore apart her psychological defense and forced her to answer. "Ugly." The ninja of Earth Dragon answered in a trembling voice. "Ugly." The gentle hand stroking her cheeks paused for a moment, and she couldn't help complaining, "But it doesn't feel ugly." "Is it a code name?" "Zi Choin Mao." "No, it's impolite to let a woman use such a title." "How old are you?" 30, 31. "Older than me." The gentle voice in her ear stroked her hair and asked curiously, "Have you done hair?" "No." "What about skincare?" I learned a little. It's too casual. The sunburn is very serious, and there are already crow's feet." The demon-like voice sighed. Clearly, if she tidied herself up properly, she would become a kind and beautiful big sister. She praised the enemy in front of her from the bottom of her heart, not out of pity or any other reason, as if she did not notice her fat weight. Such sincere praise was like dew in a desperate situation. Even though he knew that this might be the enemy's trick, he still couldn't resist. He even couldn't help but feel a trace of gratitude. Was this the devil? At that moment, she felt the cold blade of the blade moving around her neck. She couldn't help but hold her breath as the fatal death was close at hand. He closed his eyes. As a ninja who works for money, she has already expected the arrival of this day. But she doesn't know why she, who has already faced death, has a trace of reluctance. He didn't want to die. Because he was praised and praised by others. For the first time in her life, she was appreciated as a woman. A line of tears seeped out from the corner of her eyes. She raised her head and waited for the end to come. But the blade only moved gently around her neck and ears. Until she opened her eyes, she saw an iron mirror slowly growing in front of her, reflecting the tragic color of blood, that beautiful yet terrifying figure, and the stunned and dazed woman at the front. It's hard to imagine, just a simple haircut, almost new. Her round cheeks were still a little pale, and her simply combed, long hair slipped from her ears, covering the scar on her cheek. A finger stained with a trace of scarlet brushed past her lips, adding a touch of bright color to her lifeless face. How is it? Is it more pleasing to the eye? Motoko leaned over and whispered in her ear with a gentle smile. "It seems that my skills are good." It's impossible to deny her skills. It's also impossible to deny that the smile in the mirror is so familiar. It's herself. It's impossible to imagine why the non-ninja in the mirror is so beautiful and happy. It's also impossible to imagine that such a possibility and future will exist. Enough, enough. Cho stared blankly at her own face, raised her hand, and covered her face. "I beg you, don't torture me anymore. A beautiful dream destined to never come true. There's nothing crueler than this in the world." She closed her eyes in despair, not daring to look again. "Kill me, Miss Motoko. Please kill me." "Maybe I will, but not now." Motoko lowered her head and whispered in her ear, "There's still something you haven't told me, right? Cho, things between us aren't over yet. If you want to leave now, isn't it a bit too irresponsible?" Along with the soft words, a desperate coldness emerged from her heart, freezing her soul inch by inch. A cold and ferocious aura enveloped her. A ruler's spirit. Where's this place? The secret ritual passed down from generation to generation of the Earth Dragons, a man-made sealed hell. Where's the target? Me? If you want to kill me, isn't it a bit too gentle to use such a thing? It's Maki Inari. The employer spent a lot of money to kidnap her and make you work for him. Where's the employer? Huaishir asked, "Who is it?" At this moment, a trace of hesitation appeared in Chao's heart. The remnants of a ninja's persistence and principles stopped her from blurting out subconsciously. But under the gaze of that pair of calm eyes, all the lies and concealment became meaningless. Chow's lips trembled, and she squeezed out the words with difficulty. Inari, Inari. In an instant, Huaisha understood. One of the candidates of the current head of the Inari family. At the same time, he was also the head of the Inari family's largest physical property, the head of the Inari family's financial power. He had a close relationship with Lamia and Minerva Technology in Rome. If it was him, it was possible for him to know Maki's whereabouts and hire elite ninjas to work for him. However, the goal was to control him through Maki? Was it because of his performance in the Demon Slayer tournament? Or was it because of the aftermath of the chaos he caused in Nara the night before yesterday? He sighed, lowered his head, and stared at the ninja in the mirror who was crying silently. His hands gently patted her shoulder. Don't blame yourself. It's not your fault. It's just because I used a despicable method. Behind her ear, there were fine scars left by the blade of hatred and the spear of compassion. She planted an irresistible poison on her prey, and under the entanglement of the world's resentment and 8 distresses, she couldn't help but want to be free. To be able to persist for such a long time, her mind was already as strong as iron. When the interrogation came to an end, the nightmare finally faded away. Finally, it's over, Cho murmured dully, looking at the broken iron mirror in front of her and the shattered face in the mirror. She smiled bitterly. At the moment when she said the name of the employer, whether it was this nightmare or the ninja career she devoted her life to, it had already come to an end. But in the end, there was still something that could be done as a ninja. In that instant, the last bit of courage that had sprouted ignited the ashes in her soul. Her 4 limbs suddenly shot backwards like snakes, tightly hugging the figure that was close to her. Then, her fat body began to expand rapidly. Following the secret ritual carved in her bones, all the fat was rapidly transforming into the fatal fat and the even more fatal nitroglycerin. The friction between the flint on her upper and lower molars injected sparks into death, igniting everything. She closed her eyes and said goodbye to the enemy behind her. Thank you, Miss Huai-Chi. The horrible fire exploded in an instant, and the blinding light swallowed everything. When the scorching heat and air waves swept over, the whole haunted house suddenly shook, and the chaotic air pressure caused a hurricane, breaking through the interference of the secret ritual, and the news of Chow's death was transmitted to the ears of every one of her companions. At the same time, it also stunned the Earth Dragons. In less than 3 minutes, Cho, who was the best at fighting a war of attrition, had died, and he was forced to use such a tragic method to bring them the last reminder. In the core of the secret ritual, the Olzi slowly raised her head and stared at the rapidly spreading darkness that even the host himself could not see through. And the slender figure slowly emerged from the burning morgue. Her pretty face was unscathed. He still had that chilling smile on his face. As if she sensed his presence, the corners of her mouth curled up, and the smile was gentle. The plan failed. At this moment, Z made the best decision in her life, and shouted with all her strength, "I'll cover the rear. Everyone retreat." Unfortunately, it was too late. In an instant, Shadow, Burial shuttled, broke through Chow's restraint, and escaped the fatal impact caused by hundreds of pounds of nitroglycerin explosion. Motoko Huai-Chi calmly walked out of the sea of fire. And as the woman moved forward, everyone felt that the rolling darkness that was invisible to the naked eye spread from her body in all directions, violently sweeping in all directions. Artificial hell. Huaisha sighed softly. Isn't it still a little too small? At that moment, the darkness of the bone-burying sanctuary spread out violently, infiltrating and invading the secret ritual from the inside out. The terrifying shadow that had fused with the ruler's remains spread out everywhere. It turned from guest to host and instantly eroded the entire secret ritual. It even relied on the power of the secret ritual to break through the limits of its own scale, completely eroding and controlling this miniature hell. He had turned everything in the secret instrument into his own sacred palace. Damned holy palace. Now, Everything in the entire haunted house had fallen into Huaishi's control. Although he could not use the hammer of pain to match the current style, there was no doubt that he had become the master of this dark hell. Within the boundaries of this theme park, within this haunted house, the essence and calamity from hell manifested in the darkness. Thus, Huaishi smiled and offered his blessings and greetings to all the tourists. Welcome to the Ghost Castle. Chapter 649. A terrifying change had already happened in an instant. After a brief moment of shock, the retreating Earth Dragon horde realized in despair that the escape that they had planned had disappeared without a trace, and they had already turned from the rulers of hell to prisoners. A large amount of blood spurted out from KO's mouth and nose. Bruises and blood stains appeared on the withered shell under the robe. That was the backlash of the mystic instrument. He lost half of his life in an instant. In his dizziness, he opened his mouth and shouted hoarsely, "Een, play the flute immediately and wake up the serpent, the only girl among the Earth Dragon horde." Een was stunned where she was. Her face was pale. She lowered her head and looked at the flute in her hand. The flute had already been torn into pieces and could not be played anymore. "It's over." Ko closed his eyes in despair. In the darkness, the strange sound of the song had stopped abruptly and was replaced by a sad melody that wandered in front of the three-way creek. It sounded like a pipa being played. The hoarse and mellow song echoed in the dead darkness, seeping into their hearts and playing sorrowfully in everyone's heart. Sorrow meets bitter rain, the world sighs. In the deepest part of the darkness, a cold song echoed without any warmth. Spring has no time to enjoy. The flower of helplessness has withered. Sigh drifting, sigh drifting. The lonely melody echoed around and gradually shrank. It seemed to be engraved in everyone's hearts, oppressing them until they could not breathe. In the deepest part of the rolling darkness, countless scarlet eyes lit up and looked down from the abyss, waiting for the feast to begin. And Hai, who was lost in the darkness, finally saw the woman who was slowly walking toward him from the end of the corridor. With a smile, the paper in his arms floated in front of his eyes. In her raised left hand, 5 slender fingers strummed the air, as if playing an invisible pipa, and a sonorous and sharp sound burst forth. "I learned this from an old friend. It shouldn't be wrong, right?" She smiled and asked softly, "Don't you feel that it fits the atmosphere of the haunted house?" The bare-handed ninja's eyes were scarlet. Without a word, he pounced forward. His speed was indescribably fast. In an instant, he was already close to her. "Damn woman, go to hell." A fist covered in a layer of dark purple light smashed towards Huaishi's face, but in the darkness, Huaishi's body floated backwards as if weightless. He barely managed to snatch the punch that was filled with corrosive power. His smile remained unchanged. "You're almost disfigured?" Miss Susie opened her mouth and asked, "To use such despicable means on a woman, could it be that I've offended you in some way?" As the sound spread, a crack appeared on Hai's arm, extending diagonally from his elbow and circling around him head to tail. Then blood spurted out. The arm fell to the ground. After that, the miserable cries of pain had time to spread. Amidst the splattering blood, the smiling face was already within reach. The blade of hatred slashed through. This was the last thing Hai saw. "Noob's next." Huaisher swung his blade and used blood shake to get rid of the excess blood. Behind him, in the darkness, countless feathers fell and covered the corpse. A cold breeze blew, and the feathers that fell to the ground dissipated in the air, leaving nothing behind. The boundless crow tide swept through the darkness. Wherever it passed, the ghosts and demons released by the earth dragons were swallowed one by one. When the iron wings swept past, countless slash marks were left behind. Susie was constantly vomiting blood. In her perception, countless light spots were rapidly dimming, as if they were being swallowed by the invisible darkness. For a long time, the many monsters that the earth dragons kept in the time of encountering demons were decreasing at a jaw-dropping speed. What was even more terrifying was that the members of the earth dragons were rapidly decreasing. In less than 3 minutes, 1/3 of them had been lost. Cho, Hai, Chun, and Shun, the 4 of them were no longer in contact. His face was pale, and he was panting heavily. "What is Mao doing?" Susie whispered hoarsely. "It's just an ordinary woman. Hasn't he settled it yet? If this continues, the Earth Dragons will be wiped out." Zhenshi, quick, follow me. In the chaotic haunted house, Zhenshi's hand was pulled by Miss Huaiji, who chased after her from the darkness. She was running forward involuntarily, passing through many doors and stairs, heading out of the haunted house. "What's going on? Why are we leaving so suddenly?" Zhenshi asked confusedly. "Isn't the haunted house very interesting?" "Something happened." Huaiji walked in front, holding her hand, and said in a hurry, "This is no longer a safe place. We have to ensure your safety first." As if sensing the girl's uneasiness, she turned around and revealed a bright smile. "Don't be afraid, Zhenshi. No matter what happens, I will protect you." But at that moment, Shinichi's footsteps suddenly stopped in place. She broke free from that hand. Miss Huaiji, who was walking in front, was startled. She turned around and looked at her with a frown. Noticing her wary gaze, he vaguely understood. The voice was no longer a hoarse female voice. Instead, it had become a man's deep voice. "Really? What is going on? Why did you suddenly realize it?" Scratching his head impatiently, he asked coldly, "Did I expose myself somehow?" How should I put it? Although I am happy to hear Miss Huaiji say that you will protect me. But Miss Huaiji... No, Sakiko's smile is not like this. Zhenshi thought about it, and said seriously, "As a mixed blood, I am very sensitive to other people's emotions and eyes, sir. Sakiko, when she smiles, it makes people feel warm and bright. It makes people feel at ease. But sometimes, it makes people feel that she is lonely. But as long as she can see other people living well, she will be happy. That is why she is so lonely." "But you are different." Zhenshi looked at the face that was no different from Miss Huaiji's, and her eyes gradually became disdainful. "Your smile is too flattering, sir. You are like those scumbags who use their looks to trick little boys to spend money on them. You don't have the loneliness of a beauty at all." Then she asked curiously, "You don't have any sense of experience. I guess you must be very ugly, right?" The imposter Mao was stunned. That beautiful face of his gradually became ferocious, and his face became pale. Just as he was about to pounce on her, Shin's shadow suddenly swelled up, and a huge steel crow spread its wings and charged at him. Its sharp claws scratched at his fake face, leaving a few bloody scars on his face. The sharp sound of steel rubbing against each other was heard. A sharp blade suddenly pierced out from Mao's hand and slashed towards the crow's steel wings. In the midst of the sparks, the crow that was rushing towards him slowed down, and he actually rushed over to Zhenshi. Then Mao was stunned, because Zhenshi, who should have been running away, was actually rushing towards him. The unarmed girl raised her hand and pulled out a heavy, pitch-black short stick from her rather rustic satchel. Her movements were swift as she seized this fleeting opportunity and pressed it against his face without any hesitation. She pressed the switch. A dazzling light burst out. After the illegal modification, a terrifying electric current that was more than 4 times the normal voltage instantly burst out, spreading along the scratched face. 1, 2, 3. Aiming at the face, the neck, and the heart, Zhenshi didn't pull out the stun baton until the smell of burnt flesh spread out. In just a few short seconds, the stun baton was burned red. Obviously, there was a short circuit inside, and there was no way to continue using it. Even if it was an ascendant, under the sudden attack of high-voltage electricity, they would also be paralyzed. Not to mention this kind of illegal stun baton that was designed to kill people in one hit. Zhenshi panted, raised her hand to pry open her cramped fingers that couldn't loosen from the stun baton, raised her foot, kicked the broken stun baton to the side, and looked down at the unfamiliar face that was gradually changing. "Mr. Mixed-race girls don't go out unarmed." Mao was like a fish out of a water tank. He opened his mouth with difficulty, spitting out a string of white foam, his limbs twitching. After the disguise was broken, a face full of scars was revealed. Combined with the women's clothing on him, it was especially disgusting. As expected, so ugly. The girl's disdain made the pair of dazed eyes become bloodshot. Mount gritted his teeth and panted. Years of cruel training allowed him to quickly regain control of his limbs. In just a few seconds, he would be able to get up from the ground and teach this little bitch a lesson. But then, he saw She pull out a ridiculously heavy pistol from her pocket. It was a revolver with the shape of a fly, engraved on the handle. Heike-san said that an ascendant isn't that easy to take down, so I must take the opportunity to add safety measures. She struggled to grasp the handle of the pistol, pressed it against his knee, looked up and said embarrassedly, "I'm sorry, this is my first time using a gun. Can you please not tremble too much?" Bang! There was a loud bang. Mount let out a sharp scream. His knees were unscathed, but a large patch of scarlet red quickly appeared between his legs. His entire body twitched on the ground with great difficulty. "Ah, I missed. Is this the legendary recoil? Amazing!" She exclaimed in shock. Looking at the gun in her hand, she felt that this thing was indeed amazing. "Mister, please don't move." Before fainting in despair, Mao only had time to hear the girl's last words. "Don't worry. I'll only break your limbs. I won't kill you." Bang, 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 bang. Then, in the dead silence, there was no other sound. Only a loud sound that sounded like the hiss of a giant snake came from afar. The haunted house shook. Chapter 650. The sharp sound of scales scraping against each other echoed in the darkness. Fleischer's footsteps faltered. He could feel something growing rapidly in the darkness. Something was growing rapidly beyond his control. At that moment, in the secret chamber of the Earth Dragons, the gathered ninjas were sitting on the ground, heavily injured. "Clench your teeth," old Zuko spoke. On his face, 2 bleeding depressions were raised, as if he was scrutinizing Yin. He said, "Don't be afraid." He held the blade in one hand and Yin's wrist in the other. With a swing of the blade, an arm fell to the ground and was devoured by the burly man crawling on the ground. A scalp-numbing chewing sound echoed in the darkness. It was C. The ninja who represented the snake of the 12 heavenly stems opened his mouth and devoured the limbs of his comrades. His tiny arms were easily chewed and swallowed by the huge mouth filled with fangs. Then, unscientifically, his body grew by tens of centimeters. On his skin, the patterns of the snake's scales were prominent. After the thin layer of skin split open, a soft layer of cuticle poked out from between the muscles. When exposed to the air, it hardened rapidly, turning from pale white to grayish black. Zuko's eyes, Yin's hands, Noon's legs, Immortal's liver. The more he devoured, the bigger his body grew. The more his strength grew, the thinner his will and soul became. Suddenly, C stopped moving. His entire body stiffened on the spot. The muscles under his skin writhed. Suddenly, he shed his skin from the top of his head and turned into a ferocious snake, hissing loudly. The thin layer of human skin seemed to be connected to a bottomless cave. The snake slithered out for tens of meters but still could not see the end. That was no longer C. At best, what C provided was just a shell. What was born and sprouted from it was divinity that had fallen into hell, the fallen river lord, the art of dragon transformation. That was how it used to be. Originally, it should have manifested as the noble dragon god transformed by Shun. However, when there were no dragons in the world, the dragons on earth fell into hell. Shun, who was once the strongest, fell to the weakest and could only be replaced by C, carrying out this sacrifice and duty. Now, the hell serpent had answered the summons. Flicking its scarlet forked tongue, the great serpent looked down at the ground before it and asked in C's cold voice, "Where is the enemy?" "It's probably behind you." In the deathly silent secret chamber, a voice that did not belong to this place rang out. In the boiling darkness, a slender figure slowly rose up. She held a red blade in her hand and smiled. An aura of calamity, far stronger than the serpent's, appeared from those pitch-black eyes. The Chaos Abyss's love and blessing had descended upon this place, but didn't care for the monster that it raised. Instead, it stood on the opposing side. In the bone burial sanctum, The resentment aura of the decaying dream's corpse spread out. Under the long-sleeved glove, the mechanized right arm opened slightly. The furnace was ignited, and the blessing flame from the ruler burned silently. Just like that, he looked down at the giant snake that had intruded in front of him. Huaishur smiled and asked, "Why are you looking for me?" "Sorry for bothering you. Goodbye." If Orochi had hands, he would have cupped his fists. The pair of large vertical pupils shrunk to a point in an instant. The forked tongue almost straightened. Then, the gigantic body that slithered out from the cracks in the human skin suddenly stopped, then began to shrink and retreat at twice the speed. Without any hesitation, reverse into the warehouse. This place is too dangerous. I'd better return to hell as soon as possible. He did not hesitate to go against the secret ritual and the army's contract. He was prepared to pay 3 times the price to return, even if he had to go back 2 cycles. "You're leaving just like that? What's the point? You're already here." The hospitable Miss Ji urged him to stay. "At least have a meal before you leave." In the billowing darkness behind her, countless excited scarlet eyes appeared. The metallic light overlapped, and a greedy and ferocious aura spread out. It was already unbearably thirsty. Since someone had already ordered takeout, what was there to be polite about? "It's time to eat." In that instant, the serpent that had shrunk into a ball roared madly. It opened its mouth and spat out a purplish-black mist, swallowing the figure like a tidal wave. But then, the poisonous tide was opened up. The sword that was raised high slashed down. With a step forward, it was already close at hand. Behind Huaishur, the rapidly spreading tide of poison began to shrink, as if it was being pulled inwards by an invisible giant mouth into the sanctum of bones. Not a single drop was left. The sword was raised again, aimed at its head, and slashed down. Under the stimulation of death, the serpent hissed, opened its mouth, and pounced toward Huaiji. In the next moment, it was as if it was struck by lightning. Because resentment had already been slashed down, like a cannon, the rough shape of Tang bamboo tore through the air, almost turning into a blazing light. It left the rumbling behind and had already slashed on the serpent's head. Like a hammer, the serpent that flew up was smashed to the ground. The hard scales on its head fell apart, and its flesh was cleanly cut to 2 sides. A deep chisel mark had been left on the skull that was as hard as iron and stone. Almost at that moment, it was split into 2 halves. Amidst the intense shock and pain, the giant serpent twitched crazily, wanting to escape. But in Huaishur's hand, the blade quietly turned around. His hands were lying horizontally, as if he was pushing something invisible forward. The blade was inserted into the serpent's huge mouth, cutting off its fangs. Then, without waiting for the serpent to react, it pressed forward step by step. It ran as fast as lightning. A huge crack bloomed from the right side of the huge mouth. As the blade pushed forward coldly, its body was almost thrown into 2 halves from the beginning to the end. The stinky blood gushed out like a tide, and then it was all swallowed by the bone burial sanctuary. For the first time, the incomparably huge serpent experienced the fear that its compatriots in Uezhou felt when they were on the chopping board. Because of the sweeping tide of crows, countless iron wings spread out, and they couldn't wait to pounce out. Countless crows opened their mouths with an insatiable appetite. They cruelly pulled out the scales, coldly pecked at the flesh, and swallowed the blood without knowing when to stop. In the blink of an eye, the wound cut open by the blade exposed white bone. The giant serpent crazily rolled on the ground, spasming, and suddenly arched its body. It let out a long hiss, opened its mouth, and crazily swallowed. The stunned earth dragons didn't even have time to react before they let out a tragic cry. The fallen river master was extracting their lives, and through the contract, he was crazily stripping away their origin substance. All the earth dragons who had participated in the sacrifice were turned into dust, and the giant serpent from hell was rapidly expanding, truly becoming a huge creature. The wound quickly closed, and new scales blocked the iron crows from pecking at it. Fierce and fierce, it pounced at Huaishur without any regard for its own safety. A strike filled with hatred. But when Huaishur raised the blade, waiting for it to come to him, he saw the giant serpent make an incredible turn in its original position, rushing out diagonally and breaking through the wall. It slipped away. It spat out all the energy it had swallowed without any regard for the consequences. It was equivalent to 6 ascendants exploding in an instant, breaking through the secret ritual of encountering demons. At the same time, it was heavily injured by the chaotic origin substance. It fled to the outside world without any regard for the consequences. This was the sharp intuition of a wild beast, a survival method it had learned during its long life in hell. Now, it couldn't care less about the cover of the artificial hell, and had even abandoned the only way to return to hell. Even if it exposed its existence in the real world, it was still much safer than hiding in that haunted house. It had to escape. With a boom, the giant serpent broke through the wall and charged into the haunted house. The screams of tourists could be heard, but it didn't care about enjoying the sweet blood. Instead, it frantically wriggled along the corridor, fleeing downwards, impatiently embracing the light of freedom. It was only a sliver away from the door. Its movements came to an abrupt halt. An arm reached out from the crack in encountering demons, holding a blade and stabbing out. After piercing through the serpent's bones, it was nailed to the ground. Countless scarlet eyes opened on the blade of resentment. Darkness surged, and the sacred burial ground opened once more, pulling the giant serpent's body back inch by inch. The giant serpent hissed in fear, struggling, but its strength grew weaker and weaker. Its blood, origin substance, and even the hell's calamity hidden within its body were all rapidly flowing away along the blade. It was as if a soft drink had been inserted with a straw. It was difficult to stop the outflow. In the midst of the crows, its body began to shrink at an exaggerated rate. Soon, it was only a dozen meters long, turning into a shriveled specimen of skin and bones, and no longer made any sound. There's actually leftovers? Can you guys not be picky with your food? Heat it up when we go back later, and eat it all, understand? Just like that, the remaining body of the giant serpent was dragged by Huaishur with one hand, passing through the huge haunted house and moving backwards bit by bit, under everyone's dumbfounded and horrified gazes. Sorry to disturb. Everyone, please continue, please continue. The woman covered in blood dragged the snake's corpse, nodding and apologizing along the way, giving a sincere smile to the tourists who had their tour experience ruined. Gradually, she disappeared into the depths of the haunted house, never to be seen again. After circling around, Huaishur finally found Jinshi, who had been abducted to a secluded corner. He had to admit that the earthly dragons had prepared a lot in advance. All the cameras along the way had been destroyed, which saved him a lot of effort. However, even though he was mentally prepared, he was still stunned when he saw Jinshi. Bang! A low muffled sound came. The lonely girl squatted beside the pool of blood, holding the Lord of the Flies upside down in her hand, holding the gun barrel as if she was holding a hammer. She raised her hand and smashed the head of the cross-dressing pervert who was already twitching weakly on the ground. Another bang was heard, the crisp sound that made one's scalp numb spread out. In her coma, Mao's limbs twitched violently, and then she stopped moving. Is that so? She asked uneasily. Yes, that's right. Just aim here and smash twice more. Listen to me. You can't go wrong. This guy is pretending. How can sublimators die so easily? Beelzebub said excitedly. There's no reason to talk to this cross-dressing pervert who deceives girls. Just smash his head and be done with it. Huaishur's face twitched as she watched Jun. She pick up the Lord of the Flies and hit Mao on the head again. She couldn't help but feel pity. Don't fight anymore. Even if he was a cross-dressing pervert, he still had his own difficulties and dignity. Ah, Miss Huaishur, you're finally back. When She heard the footsteps behind her, she immediately turned around nervously. After seeing who it was, she finally let out a sigh of relief. As if she had just been pardoned, she rushed forward and threw herself into her sister's arms. I'm so scared by myself. I'm so scared. If Senior Beelzebub didn't comfort me, I might have cried already. Stop rubbing, sister. Stop rubbing. I'm scared. Huaishi's expression twitched. She lowered her head to look at She's intoxicated expression as she took advantage of her. She didn't look scared at all. On the contrary, the one on the ground was about to cry. Not to mention the concussion. Who knows how many cracks in his skull already had. What did you do? Miss Huaishi, didn't you say you wanted to hit his limbs? But sublimators are really scary. It was my first time using a gun, and I couldn't hit him accurately. Then Senior Beelzebub told me to hit his head. I was afraid that one hit wasn't enough, so I hit him a few more times. No, you're the one who's scary. Beelzebub, what the hell did you teach her when I wasn't around? Looking at Shi, who seemed to be trembling but was actually very excited, Shi felt that she had gained some strange attributes. She seemed to hear the voice of level up. Shi felt that even without Shi could have done it with some effort. Was this the legendary protagonist style? And she was just a passing cheat, an old lady who was responsible for giving out treasures? Miss Huai started to doubt her life. Next was the survey of Nara Fantasyland's visitors. Just outside the haunted house, an unshaven uncle wearing a very warm and cute uniform was passionately interviewing the visitors, asking about the recent horror and curse haunted house experience. He was also giving out prizes. Please be honest with us. For the sake of better service, please. The staff sans enthusiasm and honesty made the visitors forget about their concerns and speak frankly. Actually, it's not bad overall. The setting of the puzzle, the part where we were chased by ghosts, and the little girl's help was really a stroke of genius. If we didn't analyze the background after we came out, we wouldn't have known that the "Don't Come" sign in the lobby was written by Kaori. What a kind child. I sincerely hope that she can become a Buddha. Among an intimate couple, a touched female visitor gave a good review. It's just that part was too exaggerated and caused everyone to fall out of character. The fashionable male tourist next to him said, "In the inpatient department on the 4th floor, my girlfriend and I were trembling in fear when we suddenly saw a woman covered in blood in the corridor. She was dragging such a huge snake as she walked past. It was too exaggerated. How should I put it? I didn't feel anything at all. Instead, I felt like laughing." He paused for a moment and said with appreciation, "But out of that part, the earthquake simulation is really amazing. I've never experienced it before. Please keep up the good work." What the hell is earthquake simulation? Mr. Staff was stunned for a long time. He felt that there were 100,000 question marks rising in his head. And a big snake? A woman covered in blood? What the hell are you talking about? Is there such a part in our haunted house setting? Before he could react, a middle-aged man wearing sunglasses next to him squeezed over and said enthusiastically, "The overall experience is actually very good, but maybe because there's a girl in staff who's too beautiful, there's no sense of horror at all. By the way, brother, can you tell me the contact information of that girl? She's wearing a white dress, covered in blood, and holding a katana in her hand. To be honest, I'm a talent scout. The first moment I saw that girl, I knew that she has the potential to be popular. Even if she doesn't have any acting skills, she can become a powerful idol." Huh. Mr. Staff finally couldn't help but look shocked. He couldn't believe it. Do we have such a person here? Stop it. There's no need to lie, even if you don't want to tell me. The talent scout said seriously, "But I'll definitely come again tomorrow. If you don't get the contact information of that girl, I'll never give up." "No, we don't have that kind of woman here. Don't be crazy." The middle-aged staff's expression was complicated. He wanted to say something, but stopped. He didn't know what to say. "The one with the big snake? I know, it must be a hidden plot." The young man next to him said with regret, "The seemingly simple haunted house actually has a hidden plot. Sigh, it's such a pity. I claim to be a deduction expert, but there are still clues that I haven't found. The others are okay, but the woman who tortured the body was really scary." The smoking middle-aged man said, "He clearly looks thin and a little rustic, but he's holding something like a hammer in his hand. He's squatting in the aisle and smashing a person's head with a burnt body. It's too violent, the kind that makes loud banging sounds. When she heard my footsteps, she even turned around and smiled at me. Yes, I was really scared out of my wits." The woman with a strong Kansai accent joined in. "If I didn't know it was fake, I would have called the police." "Hey, What do you mean there's no such staff? Wow, don't joke around. Hey, why is your face whiter than mine? Even if it's a joke, this is too much. In short, for some reason, although everyone gave a collective positive review, they always felt that their experience was very messy. Half an hour later, the middle-aged staff with a face full of doubt returned to the lounge with a pile of opinion forms and knocked on the door of the director's office. Oh, have the visitor opinion forms been sorted out? Sasaki can... Well, it's all here. Although some of the opinions are outrageous, everyone still gave a lot of good reviews. That's fast. The director nodded with appreciation. Although he's a newcomer and has no experience in this field, he's surprisingly capable. Director, you're flattering me. Country bumpkins are not afraid of hardship. Mr. Sasaki smiled a little embarrassedly. If it's physical work, please leave it to me. I'm still very confident in this. I have something to ask you later, but Sasaki-kun, you should also rest. Did you find a night job in other places? You have dark circles under your eyes. Take care of your body. The middle-aged man called Sasaki nodded again and again. Then, the continuous work continued. He was busy until he got off work and got a thick stack of materials from the finance department. Sasaki, let's go for a drink after work. Oh, I have other work to do. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. He nodded and bowed with an embarrassed face, apologized to other colleagues, and then received the comments of really serious, and uncles are a bit rigid. Dragging his tired body, he walked out of the park. Looking at the dim yellow night, he couldn't help but feel tired. When passing by an ordinary family restaurant, he seemed to see a familiar figure. Sasaki froze for a moment, and his footsteps stopped. In the hall behind the window, he saw the back of a stunning figure. With her back to the window, she was chatting with the girl next to her. But even if he couldn't see her face, she must be a very eye-catching beauty, right? But if he had seen such a beautiful girl, there was no reason he couldn't remember her, right? Sasaki couldn't help but take a few more glances, and after laughing at his illusion of seeing a ghost, he walked to his current home, a dilapidated and dim rental house. I'm back, Zwido City. There's barbecued pork on sale in the supermarket today. I can cook ramen. He opened the door, and soon, he smelled a strong smell of blood. Sasaki looked up in shock and saw his old friend panting on the chair and the huge wound on his chest. You're hurt? Who did this? Who else could it be? The blind swordsman smiled helplessly. The frequency of the wrong murderer is getting faster and faster, Sasaki. We don't have much time left. Sasaki was silent. After a long time, he slowly nodded. Chapter 651. After dinner, Huaisher finally received a call from Hooper. What took you so long? I also have work to do, okay? I just met a very troublesome uncle and almost died. Hooper sighed, tiredly on the other side of the phone. Tell me, why can't my relatives give me any peace of mind? One after another, they're all like this. It's fine if they're dead, but the living are also thinking of ways to make trouble. The sound of a lighter was mixed in with his words. Hooper took a deep breath and sighed. The person you caught has been sent over. He's indeed from the Earth Dragon clan. And there's also evidence in his head that Shinichi Kurashiki was involved in Junshi's murder. But you went a little overboard, didn't you? That guy's head was smashed with at least a dozen cracks. Even if you're abusing a noob, isn't that a little overboard? This is a long story. Huaisher subconsciously glanced at Junshi. Junshi immediately sat up straight, placed her hands in front of her knees, blinked her eyes, and looked very obedient. So, what do you plan to do next? Hoopa asked. Huaisher thought for a while and answered seriously, Of course I won't do anything. Huaisher. Hoopo's tone became more and more tired. If someone told me that you've already cut a bloody path to my third uncle with a knife, then piled up a small mountain of heads, tied him up, poured gasoline on top, and planned to burn him, I would believe it. But I won't believe that a bastard like you won't do anything. At least we're in an employer-employee relationship. Can't you be a little more honest? You're so annoying, Hoopa dear. Miss Huaisher laughed. When girls are honest with each other, shouldn't they take a shower together intimately, then have a pillow fight in their pajamas, and finally lie in bed to talk about their favorite type, their relationship experiences, and the skincare products that are on sale recently, and then hug their best friend to sleep? Why sure, Hoopa flicked the ash from his cigarette and looked up at the dark sky. My stomach can't take it anymore. Can you please stop saying such disgusting things? Hoopa sighed numbly. Take it as me begging you. Please don't ruin my beautiful impression of pure friendship between girls. You're so annoying, Hoopa dear. Even if I hear you say that, I'll still be angry. Crack. The sound of the phone's casing being crushed could be heard. All right. I was just joking. Why are you being so serious? Huaisher raised his head and stared at the gradually darkening sky outside the window. Suddenly, he said, Say, if a murderer suddenly appeared in your third uncle's house. Needless to say, the first suspect is you. Amber rolled his eyes. That third uncle of mine is nothing more than a symbol. He's just a guy who's been pushed to the front of the Kansan group as the family representative. He's not even his sender. Now, he's just an idiot who thinks I can do it after his ambition swelled. The position of family head has never had anything to do with him. Now that he's doing this, I'm afraid there's more or less someone pushing him behind the scenes. If you act rashly, you'll only give other people something to use against you. Who knows, maybe you'll really be labeled as the scapegoat of a murderer and be punished by the heavens or something. This way, you'll have 2 fewer competitors. Who knows how happy the others will be? Then what do you think? Huaisher suddenly had a bold idea. He asked expectantly, if I let him know that I have evidence of him violating the living being's mercy order and even summoning hellish creatures in the current realm, and that I plan to hand it over to the Astronomy Society, will he act desperate tonight and spend money to find someone to kill me? Find someone with a lot of people. I'll cooperate and pretend to be seriously injured to give him some confidence. 100,000 question marks flew over from the other end of the phone. Hoopa once again deeply felt and confirmed just how serious the problem in Huaisher's head was. What the hell? After finding the mastermind, he didn't want to quickly eliminate the root of the problem. Instead, he wanted to raise them like leeks and have them send people to kill him every few days. What are you planning? My happiness can't be bought with money, can it? Miss Huaiji replied with a trembling voice. I'm happy that people come to kill me. The more the better. It's best if they're scum who committed crimes and can't be redeemed even with 10,000 deaths. More of them. Sister Gomba likes them. That's enough from you. Hoopa sighed. Let my third uncle off. That trash really doesn't have any other abilities other than having some brains and investing. I'm afraid that after he receives the news of the Earth Dragon army being wiped out, he'll just shrink in his woman's bed and tremble. That sounds really unreasonable. This kind of feeling of being unable to support a wall with mud. Who said it wasn't? Don't you guys have those kind of strong and powerful villains? The kind that won't give up and only want to get rid of a stumbling block like me. As long as I don't die, they'll keep sending people to kill me. If there are, let me go and provoke them. When the time comes, I'll give you 30% of the reward. Is 30% too little? This can be discussed. Is there anything that can't be said between us good sisters? Crack. It was the sound of the phone breaking down even further. It seemed like Hoopo's patience with him was really reaching its limit. That was why Hoopo's stinky sister didn't learn any self-cultivation skills after going to Doomsday for so many years. She only cared about stealing other people's kills. It was too embarrassing. Huaisher sighed and said, Then help me prepare. He glanced at the girl beside him. Tomorrow night, Zhanshi will name Legion Bujing and start a trial with the Imperial Chef Demon. What's the bet? Nothing. Even if he wins, he won't earn a single cent. But you can tell him what the consequences will be if he refuses. Why don't you tell him such a troublesome thing? I thought that since you guys are relatives, it'll be easier to tell him, bang. He didn't know if the other party hung up or if another phone broke. In any case, it seemed like this matter was settled. Let's go. Huaisher wiped his mouth and stood up. We're going back. Late at night, in a quiet room, Huaisher opened the Cage of Dreams. Along with a flash of light, 9 huge iron ball-like things appeared on the ground, casually rolling around. It was unknown whether they had eaten too much or something else had happened. After eating the large snake that had gathered all of the Earth Dragon's origin substance, sage mark, and even the divinity of the fallen River Lord, the 9 rapping candle crows began to rapidly grow until they became like this. As they rapidly grew, bone-like iron crystals began to proliferate from their bodies, wrapping them from the inside out. In the end, they became metal balls that were half the height of a person. They looked heavy, but when one picked them up, they felt completely weightless. It was as if one was holding a balloon. After being forged by the Sunmaker, the power of Huai Shi's sealing hand had deeply penetrated them. Although they had a certain amount of mass in their steel form, they also had the form of a mist-like origin substance. From a certain perspective, they did indeed have a part of the power that was quite similar to Huai Shi's soul. This was also proof of the contract between the two sides. As an extension of the young arbiter of life, everything they had was given to them by Huai Shi. But even Huai Shi didn't expect this situation to happen. But according to the diagnostic procedures in the breeding manual given to him by the Ivory Tower, this seemed to be a manifestation of a deep transformation. After eating so many experience bags, they finally began to grow again. At present, there didn't seem to be too much of a problem. There was no need to panic at all, because the young arbiter of life Sage Mark was still operating very stably. And after they entered this state, they even began to grow at a rate dozens of times faster than before. And now, the speed was getting faster and faster. The Sage Mark's destiny was growing. Without using any secret instruments or other precious materials, it could only mean that a large number of correction values or distortions related to the young arbiter of life were continuously appearing on Huai Shi's body. The world was changing. Unfortunately, Huai Shi did not think that hundreds or thousands of mature musicians would suddenly appear in her classroom in the Ivory Tower. She also did not think that one of her 2 students would suddenly be inspired to write an earth-shattering piece of music. When the piece was completed, the heavens would weep and the hell would weep, or something like that. This change was destined to have nothing to do with the correction values. In that case, it could only be the distortion brought about by the underworld. After such a long period of planting, watering, and waiting, it was finally time for this sapling to sprout. Huai Shi held the slightly vibrating metal ball in his hand and waited nervously. It was as exciting as pulling out a box. He didn't know what kind of prize he would win. In particular, when a crack appeared on the metal ball, he became even more excited. These were all children that he had raised by himself. As a male mother, what was wrong with being excited? As the metal ball continued to vibrate, the internal weight began to rapidly increase. Obviously, the hellish creature that had turned into source matter was transforming back into a material form, increasing its mass and body bit by bit, pecking at the metal shell that bound it. Finally, in the sharp sound of metal rubbing against each other, it broke out of the shell. From within, steel birds bathed in the light of fire rose one after another. It was still dark, but it burned with pale flames, as if it had been ignited, but there was no pain or discomfort. Instead, it looked very comfortable. The original candlestick disappeared, as if it had been integrated into the body. Then, huge metal wings spread out and the sharp beak raised. Above the small head, countless fine steel fragments formed a structure that simulated the movement of the muscles. It opened its mouth and made a familiar sound. Holy. Chapter 652. When a crow began to chant, the other crows were destined to be restless. They all opened their mouths and shouted excitedly. The loud noise made Huai Shi's ears hurt. Okay, it was confirmed. It was still the original recorder, but with 2 loudspeakers. Huai Shi reached out, picked up one of them, and looked at it in confusion. He squeezed its neck, opened its wings, and pulled its claws to study it carefully. He couldn't feel the heat of the fire. It was a projection formed by the burning of the source substance, and it wouldn't really ignite anything. But in addition to the flames, its weight had increased by about 7 or 8 kilograms, and its body size was larger. But it didn't grow any tentacles or indescribable organs. It seemed that there wasn't much change, but the style was more and more similar to Cybertron. What the hell? I don't remember feeding you guys something as messy as the Tinder Source. Just when Huai Shi was at a loss, he felt a crisp sound coming from the bone burial sanctuary. It was as if an invisible eggshell had broken. In Huaishir's body, the bone burial sanctuary within the sacred mark suddenly opened. Rolling darkness ran through the veins of the sacred mark, whether it was the head, the heart, the lungs, or the limbs. It was everywhere. In an instant, it covered his body from the inside out. In that darkness, the miracle that belonged to the young master of life grew vigorously, spread, and went deep into every place at an incredible speed until it completely merged with Huaishir's body from his soul, and they became a complete body. Huaishir had an illusion. Wherever the power of the sacred mark passed, his body quickly melted and evaporated like snow under the sun, collapsing and disintegrating. In the end, Huaishir's body had disappeared from this world. What remained was a pure and flawless dark outline, a container full of quiet vitality, a carrier of the sacred mark. This was an illusion. When the body gradually merged with the soul and the sacred mark, there was no distinction between them, and they became a part of the miracle. Huaishir was quickly etherifying. In just a few moments, the progress had soared to over 90%. Once the etherification process was completed, a portion of those who had ascended would be able to completely convert their physical bodies into origin substance and then reconstruct them. Although there were limitations, they could still repair fatal injuries. It could be said that he did not have the weakness of an ordinary person. This terrifying rate of progress could only mean one thing. Have I become the group leader? Huaishir was in disbelief. All of a sudden, he became the official leader of the group. This was the only reasonable explanation. The moment the candle crows broke out of their shells, young Arbiter Ming's Hangar of Destiny was completed. The crows in the Cage of Dreams had officially become a large army of hell. Under the control of young Master Ming's holy mark, the leader of this group was undoubtedly Huaishir himself. Now, the burning iron crows in front of Huaishir were the first to welcome the transformation in this large group of hell. Through Nibelungen, Huaishir gave them the inferior sacred mark derived from his path of heaven's inquisition. In essence, it was no different from the way the destruction element gave the name to hell creatures. From this point of view, it was not unreasonable for the celestial genealogy to be called the Abyss genealogy. It was a strange place, really strange. The moment the Candle Crows completed their transformation and reached the standard of an independent large group, they officially had the title of ghosts. A blessing from a ruler, the Sunmaker, a disaster miracle that merged with ghosts. And after recasting, they became the only native species in the Twilight Village, the crystallization of creation that symbolized the existence of the Sunmaker. The three characteristics of a large group were all present. If they could not become an official large group, then it would be ridiculous. The current change was just equivalent to the Real Estate Bureau in hell finally getting the documents. They had been officially recognized. But the problem is, it doesn't seem to have changed much. After the excitement, Huaishir pinched his chin and began to ponder. This group of burning iron crows only knew how to repeat holy word and shout that they were hungry. They wanted to eat. They wanted to watch porn. There was no change at all. On the contrary, they could eat more. It was not until they finished eating the remaining big snake during the day that they barely filled their stomachs. But now, Huaishir was squatting in front of the crows like an old aunt in a kindergarten. She had a kind smile on her face. "Little friend, do you have a lot to ask? Cough, cough, do you have a lot of talents to show? Do you want to perform a show?" Of course not. The crows didn't understand what he was saying at all. They didn't know what a show was. A bunch of small heads looked at each other. After pondering for a long time, two of them stood out with their heads held high. They seemed to want to give Huaishir a show. Huaishir's eyes lit up and were full of expectation. When the first crow raised its head and opened its mouth, it actually made a sound other than holy word. Although it was very sharp and stuttering, it was enough to move Huaishir to tears. Then, in front of Huaishir, it suddenly shouted, "Name? Hey." Huaishir stared blankly. He heard the crow next to him continue, "Huaishir." "Gender?" The crow skillfully asked again. "Huaishir." The second crow's intelligence didn't seem to be very developed. It could only repeat these two words. Then, the first crow asked again, "Age?" 18. But this question was answered very smoothly. Huaishir was so angry that his face turned green. Why didn't you answer the previous question seriously? He waved his hand to stop them from relaxing their traditional skills. Huaishir began to doubt his life. What kind of scourge did he raise? They even wanted to harm him. The man's heart was broken. He smoked numbly and began to consider a serious question. Why don't I kill them all and reforge them? I'll just pretend that I never saw these heartless bastards. But just as he was deep in thought, he saw the flames on the crow in front of him begin to change. It was just like the lizardman's rainbow-colored RGB light pollution, giving it enough special effects. But apart from that, there seemed to be something different. At first, it was a hollow white, then a deep red of resentment, a fiery red of anger, a green of compassion, a pitch black of pain, a gray of sorrow. In the end, it actually began to emit a golden holy light. As the flames changed, the origin substance equipment in Huaishir's body seemed to faintly resonate with them. Huaishir thought for a moment, then pulled out the virtuous sword and lightly stabbed at the first crow. There was no collision of steel, as he had expected. The virtuous sword was like an illusion as it sank into the crow's body. Immediately afterwards, the burning crows began to emit a holy light, as if they were trying to disperse the night. They were incomparably warm and pure. In his shock and astonishment, Huaishir finally discovered that their attributes and strength could change according to the origin substance he infused them with. They could even use the power of his origin substance weapons 100% of the time. In other words, in front of him were 9 axes of rage, 9 spears of compassion, 9 hammers of pain. They could even be mixed up according to Huaishir's orders, and their numbers could increase as Huaishir advanced. They had already become an extension of Huaishir's strength and soul. They were literally hellish creatures that belonged to Huaishir alone. Just thinking about this made Huaishir feel like her male mother's heart was about to melt. Was this what it meant to be a tool? Love. Just like that, Huaishir carefully studied the crows for an entire night. The next afternoon, you receive a call from Hupa. HM. She had changed her number. Her original SIM card had probably been crushed as well, right? It's been arranged. Tonight, the first match, Hupa said in a monotonous tone. Hupo's voice was flat as he said, "Be careful. His cooking demon is a registered bartender. It's fine if you lose, but it's best if you don't get drunk and run around naked." The call ended. Huaishir stared at the number on his phone and smiled dotingly. You people from Yingzhou just love to be arrogant. You're so awkward even when reminding me. Even though she's a stinky little sister, she's actually a little cute when she's so awkward. However, it was just a bartender. He didn't know why Hupa was so flustered. He pulled out his phone, opened the collection of 10,000 sins, and began to make a post. May I ask what a bartender is? Waiting online. It's quite urgent. The first comment was, Opie Xiaobing. The second comment was, you asked me, but who the F***CK do I ask? The third comment was, F***CK your fishing party. The Astronomy Society's lackeys will die a horrible death. Therefore, the people in the collection of 10,000 sins really had no manners at all. Huaishir really liked this place. Without thinking or hesitation, Huaishir started to talk to him from the fourth comment. When he was about to reach the 200th comment, someone finally posted a link to the next day's news. E-level news. Detailed information about bartenders. The fee was 800 yuan, but the content was only a few hundred words. Huaishir finally had a rough idea of what a bartender was. Of course, this didn't stop him from talking to his friends on the third comment. He broke through the 400th comment. Today, the foul-mouthed members of the collection of 10,000 sins had increased. Congratulations. Simply put, a bartender was a specialized cooking demon that had been verified by the Cooking Demon Competition's organizing committee. It was just like how some cooking demons were especially good at desserts, some liked noodles, and some liked to cook soups and dishes. A bartender was a cooking demon that specialized in mixing drinks. Although this was a bit of nonsense, the more important thing was that a cooking demon that could obtain this title was undoubtedly the existence with the most direct fighting power among its kind. Generally speaking, wanting to defeat an enemy through cooking was a fantasy. in a serious battle, who would give you so much free time to slowly boil the oil and stew the soup, and then obediently drink it after 2 hours? If you had that much time, you would have died hundreds of times already. Of course, many cooking demons were extremely strong and didn't need to use cooking skills to deal with their enemies. Just like the muscular guy with the Russian Federation's tattoos, Vladimir, in this cooking demon competition. With that kind of strength, anything could be turned into mud with a single punch. Not to mention, many cooking demons were good at other fighting techniques. For example, the beheading king of Jinling. Chapter 653. Most of the time, other than harming people, the services provided by the cooking demons were to slowly recuperate and heal the sublimated themselves through abyss cuisine. They could even use the cooking demons' food to change their physique and temporarily obtain some adaptability or overcome some shortcomings. It was said that in the past, there were seriously injured people who went to the cooking demons for help. Some cooking demons simply boiled a pot of water and threw the person in, sprinkling some seasoning. When the soup was ready, the person was almost healed. Although the person was cooked, it was still better than dying. Similarly, there were many ways to harm people. It was not necessary to rely on the cooking demon skills. This profession was not directly related to one's combat power. In fact, the Hell Music Association was the same. Everyone was cultured, especially the disaster musicians, who walked the path of the upper class of the abyss. Those who were more developed easily had a lot of contact information of the crowns in their hands. Most problems could be solved by finding a place to ask for help, and the only ones who could directly use the cooking demon skills to cause harm to people were the bartenders. The reason was very simple. Compared to dishes, alcohol was very easy to carry, and it was not easy to spoil. Something that could be packed in a few bottles was definitely easier to carry than a lunchbox. The hell disaster refined and mixed by the cooking demons was placed in the alcohol, hidden in the copper bottle like a sealed demon. It was also very simple to use. There was no need to open the bottle, just throw it on the ground and it was done. There was no need to eat. It only needed to have the most basic breathing for it to work. Using the evaporation characteristics of alcohol itself, after sufficiently intensifying the medium, it could even create an incense aura that could affect a large area. According to the immunity medicine swallowed in advance, it was easy to give a large-scale blessing or create a poisonous fog that was difficult to breathe. Not to mention intensifying the medicinal alcohol on the spot for treatment, or using different curses, restraints, and guidance according to the alcohol they carried with them. It was simply an all-round support and output, and could be called a combat demon among the cooking demons. To be able to protect oneself in an instantaneous and ever-changing battle, and to be able to calmly observe the situation and make the most suitable cocktail. It was not only a test of reflex speed, mentality, experience, and courage, but more importantly, talent. A person with such qualities, even if he did not become a cooking demon, would have a bright future in other professions. To be able to become a registered bartender certified by the Cooking Demon Competition's organizing committee, such an opponent could not be underestimated. After pondering for a moment, Huaisher took out his original mobile phone, adjusted it to border communication, and made a call. White Mountain Pavilion. Hello, Mr. Long, Shan Fong. How have you been? Everything is fine here. Thank you for your concern. Well, it's nothing. I just had a ticket. It's good to teach students in the ivory tower. There's no need to get involved in other things. After a short exchange of greetings, he said, although it's a bit abrupt, I would like to ask you about what you told me before. Yes, the date of release should be in the next few days, right? Yeah, that's great. Is it convenient for you to spare some for me? Thank you very much then. What are you talking about? I'm only providing a tiny bit of information. I'll have to rely on the Daitengu's miraculous hands for the majority of the information. He nodded repeatedly and finally said, then please help me send it to Ingzhou. The address is in Nara. Motoko Kaori? Have you heard of it? Yes, I sold it to her. I didn't expect you to be so well informed. You're actually a rising star? That sounds amazing. Yes, it has something to do with me. After all, I'm just a student. I don't know about anything else. I'm just doing what a teacher can." After another exchange of greetings, he hung up the phone. Huaishir heaved a sigh of relief. He finally caught up with this wave. At the same time, he was pleasantly surprised that Motoko Kaori's reputation was no longer limited to Nara. Even Mount Tengo, an important sacred ground in Ingzhou's culinary and demon world, had heard of her. Although it wasn't to the extent where everyone from Earth to Hell knew of her, she could be considered a little famous, right? Huaishir rubbed his chin and began to ponder. After the culinary demon tournament ended, he would go somewhere to get some correction points or distortion points. After completing this puppet, he could prepare for the great Si Ming's transformation ceremony. Shadow Burial's counterpart was Yang Sheng. Young Si Ming was supposed to symbolize growth, but his talent was to be buried in the sacred ground. On the other hand, Tian Ming was the reaper of death. What he possessed was the purest power. This kind of contradiction and contrast was really a little confusing. However, since he had already been arranged, he might as well be clear about it. Huaishir couldn't be bothered to think too much and immersed himself in the preparation for the culinary demon tournament. Time passed in a flash. In the blink of an eye, it was nighttime. It was still the familiar underground square and the familiar audience. On the high platform, after the minister behind the curtain recited the words that no one cared about, the bell rang. Huaishir finally met his opponent this time. The bartender, Alicia Francisco. She looked different from the serious look in the photo. She looked like a blonde woman with an unusually bright smile. She gave off a reassuring aura. After scrutinizing Miss Motoko Kaori for a moment, she carried her toolbox and bypassed the table that was arranged for her. She went straight ahead and put down her toolbox opposite Huaishir's table. She didn't plan to leave. Meeting Huaishir's confused gaze, she smiled. "I'm used to mixing drinks face-to-face with the customers. You don't mind if I disturb you, right?" "It's okay. I brought some good wine today." Huaishir shook his head, opened the ice-covered fresh-keeping box beside him, and took out an unlabeled sake bottle. The heavy gray wine bottle was filled with viscous wine. With a slight shake, it produced layers of ripples. Through the blurry glass surface, a vague illusion evolved. Even though it was sealed tightly, the moment it was seen, one could still smell the clear and cold fragrance of the wine. Alicia raised her eyebrows slightly, as if she hadn't expected such a development. "Oh, you want to compete with the bartender with wine?" She chuckled softly and didn't mock Huaishir for overestimating himself. She just reminded him, "I've seen the competition a few days ago. Don't tell me it's still water cutting. I like a strong taste. If the alcohol content is too low, it can't satisfy a drunkard like me. Don't worry. I won't embarrass myself in front of an expert with mediocre skills." Huaishir shrugged indifferently. Besides, isn't it the bartender who laughs the happiest when hearing water cutting? If you do water cutting too much, you'll feel annoyed. Besides, there's no technical content. If you really want to mix water, there are countless ways. How can it be so simple? Alicia shook her head and looked around at the surrounding environment and the audience. She seemed helpless. Although as a feminist, I don't like to perform this kind of gladiatorial performance with another woman. I can't help it. I've accepted the money. It doesn't matter. I won't lose when it comes to fist techniques. Miss Huaishir smiled and didn't care about this. He looked around his cooking table and looked down at Alicia's toolbox. However, can such a small box hold anything? It was true that the toolbox was already the size of a standard suitcase, but it was still too small for the requirements of a bartender. Not to mention how much wine it could hold, it was enough to fit an ice maker, not to mention other tools. Even if it was absolutely enough at ordinary times, it would be too arrogant to use it in a professional duel. "Don't worry about this. This is a good thing I bought from the Clover Workshop." Alicia smiled mysteriously. She raised her hand and knocked on the top of the box. The box unfolded on its own and lay flat on the ground. Immediately afterward, the two sections of the box were pieced together, and a huge oak cabinet slowly rose from the darkness. Huaishir's eyes nearly popped out of her head when she saw the 2-meter-tall heavy oak cabinet that had popped out of her suitcase. Not to mention There was also a workbench that extended out from the side, as well as a variety of instruments and hidden wine that appeared as the cabinet opened up. Within a few seconds, a standard wine cabinet and bartending workbench were placed in front of Huaishur. He was dumbfounded. He pointed to the box that was still spread on the ground and pointed to the workbench. "This, are you kidding?" After all, he was a gold medal fighter of the Command Bureau and a hero who had been to hell. He was not a country bumpkin who had never seen anything. Besides, he also had similar things. But this kind of border relic that involved the scale of space, someone actually used it to make a wine cabinet and a bartending workbench? It was like a takeout in a private jet. It was too outrageous. Amazing, right? Alicia grinned proudly and patted her, but let me say it in advance. As a bartender, I still have my professionalism. I can't bear to poison a beauty like Miss Huaiji. Since you want to compete in wine, why don't we see who gets drunk first? For things like wine, it's best to do what you can. If you can't hold it, you have to tell me in advance. Don't worry, I will. Huaishur nodded. So, a dazzling array of tools was placed on the workbench in front of him. Huaishur had to admit that there were many things that he had never heard of, let alone seen. He finally felt the gap between the professionals. "What is this spring?" "A tool for foaming in the bartending." Alicia replied kindly. "What about this thing that looks like a shovel?" "It's for chiseling ice." "I'm actually quite old-fashioned. I'm not used to the finished products in the ice machine. I always feel that it's too industrialized. There's no technical content, and it's not as fast as me." "Then what is this thing that looks like a pistol?" It's a gun." Alicia was silent for a moment awkwardly and stuffed the thing into the drawer below. "I played with the target when I was drinking last time and forgot to put it back." "Is it so wild to exercise after drinking?" Huaishur was shocked and couldn't help but sigh. The entertainment in the archaeological team is really amazing. Alicia's movements paused for a moment. Chapter 654. There was a short silence, but it felt like an entire day had passed. Elisa's fingers only trembled slightly. Apart from her, no one else knew about Huaishur's whisper and the stormy waves that those words set off in her heart. She quickly calmed down. "It's not good to pry into people's privacy, Miss Huaishur. Should I scold you?" She leaned closer and said in a low voice, "Although it's not some unbearable past, where did you find out about it? I shouldn't have revealed anything." As she spoke, she raised her green eyes and stared into Huaishur's eyes. Darkness seemed to surge in his pupils, reflecting Miss Huaishur's face, not allowing any lies to appear. This was the gaze and questioning from the archaeological team, from a professional abyss explorer. "If I said tomorrow news, you definitely wouldn't believe me." Huaishur sighed. "If I tried to find out your true identity from tomorrow news, I would only be led to some strange organization at the border by those clues, right? It wasn't until just now that I realized that it was just a smoke bomb that you deliberately released. After all, the bartender was a strong enemy. Even someone as stingy as Huaishur could only grit his teeth and buy information about his opponent from tomorrow news. B-level news. $10,000 for 1,000 words. It only supported one-time reading, but there were not many words. Elisa Francisco. Female, age 31. Where is she from? What had she done before? After obtaining the culinary demon's aptitude at the age of 26, she had carried out more than 4 abyss explorations until now. It added up to less than 200 words, and she was still charging for 1,000 words. And the content was empty and boring, without any meaning at all. Other than that, there was only a blurry profile photo full of suspicious points. There was nothing else. Huaishur shouldn't have been able to see anything. Unfortunately, she forgot to put away her pistol when she was showing off her new bag. Huaishur was too close to the workbench. He was so close that he could clearly see the characteristics of the pistol and the yellow and black climbing logo on the handle. That was the logo of the Extreme Sports Club. It was a club created by Lucian that was only limited to the internal members of the Astronomical Society. In other words, it was an unpopular extreme team that only the official members of the archaeological team were interested in. The number of members was too small. At most, there were no more than 50 people. Huaishur had been persuaded by Lucian many times, so he was very clear about this. Even though it looked like a club, it was actually a super elite hellish exploration and mutual aid organization led by the president, Lucian. The purpose of the Extreme Sports Club was to climb deeper into hell. It was more like a platform for most of the elites in the archaeological team to communicate. In order to properly utilize the power, connections, and information he had in hell, and at the same time, provide help to others as much as possible. It could be said that there were many strong players there, and there was no lack of loners. In other words, they were fierce men who did not rely on the help of other teammates and headed to hell alone. More importantly, all the members of the Extreme Club should be working members of the Astronomical Association's archaeological team. Fleischer answered calmly. In turn, he looked at Eliza and asked in a low voice, "It's against the rules for registered members of the archaeological team to do private work, right?" Eliza's expression twitched and her eyes drifted. "Just don't say it. Since you can know this, you must have something to do with the club. Do me a favor and don't expose me. How about I let you have 1 round? 2 rounds. Fleischer raised 2 fingers without hesitation. Eliza shook her head decisively. 2 rounds is too much. 1 round is still possible to turn the tables. 2 rounds. You will lose anyway. You might as well expose me. Then forget it." Fleischer shook his head indifferently. "Huh?" Eliza was stunned. "I said forget it." Fleischer explained, "Anyway, I didn't intend to use this to coerce you, but because of this, I'm very curious." He intimately enjoyed the wonderful atmosphere of being close to the blonde sister. He raised his head and looked behind Eliza at the middle-aged man with a pale face in the audience seat. "Why did you find an employer like Li Ji Bujing? He has a lot of money." Eliza widened her eyes, raised her hand, and patted the cabinet next to her. "In order to buy this thing, I owe a large loan. I need a generous customer to pay for me. But I'm now on a mandatory holiday, so I can't go to hell to eat. I can only live in the present world. That's it." Fleischer was stunned. "With money, you can really do whatever you want. At least most of the time. Let me get the ugly words out of the way first. Even if you know so much, the money he gave is too much. I won't go easy on you no matter what." She paused for a moment and said seriously, "But since we're both girls, I can let you lose with dignity. No matter when, it's completely okay to admit defeat." "What a coincidence, I want to say that too." Fleischer smiled. "Then, the chat should be over. Let's start?" "Let's start." Fleischer slowly straightened up and distanced himself from the blonde sister. "How do we compete? Didn't you bring wine? If you were really arrogant enough to compete with the bartender, then use the most traditional turn-based system. Each round, both sides will offer 1 cup. The person who falls first will admit defeat, and the one who stands can win." Eliza said, "If there is a disagreement in the archaeological team, they usually come to me to solve it like this. Isn't it fair? I don't care." Fleischer shrugged and then asked the last question. "Then, who comes first and who drinks first? The way to solve this problem is more fair." Eliza showed a mysterious smile. With a twist of her wrist and a flick of her 5 fingers, an ancient gold coin with a faint curse jumped out like magic. It was flipping between her 5 fingers. The face of the skeleton on the front and the engraved, complex spells on the back were constantly overlapping and changing. It was obviously a relic from a border. This was the solution given by Eliza, the simplest way. Guess the coin. Word or flower? Fleischer lowered his head and looked at the gold coin flipping in her hand. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "Spend it. I like the shape of the skull." So Eliza smiled, raised her thumb, and flicked it. In an instant, the gold coin rose into the air. It rose up in the dead silence. The golden brilliance rotated and reflected in the air, flashing between the eyes of the two. The coin rose to the highest point and rolled down. In Fleischer's eyes, Eliza's sly smile was reflected. At that moment, the big sister's palm suddenly raised up and fished out the coin in midair. No, it should be patted down. In a fleeting moment, she seized a glimmer of opportunity to finalize the outcome. Word on word. She won, if she really did win the gold coin. Indeed, the heavy and cold gold coin had already landed in her palm, but her palm was unable to press down and finalize this result. Instead, she felt the soft and slender fingers with a trace of coldness in her palm. Her palm was pressed against hers. Eliza's pupils shrank in shock, and she finally saw Miss Huaiji's movements clearly. At that moment, she didn't try to destroy her movements. Instead, she gently and quickly stuck in front of her palm. Just under the overlapping fingers and palms of the two, the gold coin stood upright in midair. It was tilting subtly with the changes in their muscles. It changed from pure luck to pure wrestling, but it seemed to become more fair. This was also something that made Eliza even more stunned. The other party's reflexes, speed, skills, and experience could actually catch up with her, an experienced archaeologist, and even faintly surpass her. The palms of the two collided and were in a stalemate in midair. It was like a competition of internal force in traditional martial arts novels. The huge force flowed between the flexible fulcrum formed by the wrist, palm, and fingers, forming a fragile balance. Every time their palms moved slightly, there was a sharp friction sound in the air. It was like the sound of invisible glass being rubbed. It made one's teeth ache. Then there was the sound of the balance collapsing. It came from Miss Huaiji's palm. She used the drummer's skills without hesitation. The force of her fingers at zero distance was enough to compete with the terrifying force of Chumo Sumo, not to mention overpowering the bartender's strength first. The index finger pressed forward by 1 centimeter, then the ring finger, the thumb, and the little finger. The balance of the arm wrestling began to drift. Huaishir had the upper hand. The flower was above, and the word was below. He pressed Eliza's palm down inch by inch, until Eliza sighed and suddenly retracted her hand, no longer wrestling with Huaishir. "Huh!" The dust settled. "Huh!" Huaishir frowned. "You should still have the strength to fight back. Are you giving up just like that?" Fingers are the bartender's life, not a tool used to wrestle with others. Accuracy and sensitivity are the most important things. It would be ridiculous to hurt your fingers before the competition. Eliza moved her 5 fingers, and her smile became more and more sly. "Besides, I may not lose." At that moment, Huaishir's palm felt a strange touch. It was as if the surface of the gold coin pressed on the table was changing rapidly. The relief of the skull was disappearing quickly, and it was replaced by the incantation on the back. When he raised his hand, he saw the final result. There was a flower on the word. It was Eliza who won. Huaishir suddenly smiled bitterly. He didn't expect that the outcome had been decided before the coin toss. From the beginning, she had made up her mind to cheat. So shameless? He chuckled in a low voice. This is the proof of going all out. Eliza raised her finger, dug out the gold coin embedded in the table, and tossed it in the air. "In order to win from you, I have taken out all the despicable means of the gambler. Shouldn't you be happy?" "That's really an honor." Huaishir shrugged. Eliza had returned to her workbench. After taking off her coat and hanging it on the hook of the wine cabinet, the iconic white shirt and black vest inside were revealed. Her blonde hair was tied up behind her head, looking very capable. The bartender was preparing for work. The duel was about to begin. Chapter 655. Do you have any favorite wine? Behind the workbench, Eliza asked warmly. "If it's from Ingzhou, it should be sake or whiskey, right? Or tequila. Dongshia's white wine is also fine. Please feel free to order. It's my treat today." Giving out free questions at this time, isn't it obvious that you have bad intentions? Huaishir knocked on the bar in front of him. "I don't drink much when I mix, so you can make yourself at home. If you want, give me some wine with loneliness and heartache. Please don't take out this messy way of ordering wine again, okay? We don't have that kind of thing here." Eliza took out a bottle, pulled out the cork, and smelled it. She happily enjoyed the sweet taste. "How about some rum? It can be mixed with happy water. After putting 2 slices of lemon, you will feel free. Although the place that originally felt very free will be miserable in the end, it's always right to enjoy the present." "So casual?" Huaishir was dumbfounded. "It's just a joke. The one who enjoys the present is me." She directly picked up the bottle of rum, drank a part of it, and then threw it aside. This was her freedom, and it had nothing to do with others. End of the state. In this way, Eliza exhaled happily. She reached out and took out the base wine prepared for this competition from the deepest part of the cabinet. Her movements were swift. The bottles were piled up like a small mountain. Huaishi's eyes widened. So exaggerated? It looks like a lot, but it's actually just seasoning. Just between her 5 fingers, strands of dark precipitation slowly emerged. Gray lines lit up from under her fingernails, and countless ferocious and malicious eyes intertwined in the darkness between her 5 fingers. That was the breath left by the existence above the abyss, the curse left by the king who ruled hell. The curse of the ruler? Huaishi frowned. No wonder you were forced to take a vacation. What did you do to provoke a great god? It's just a little contribution, don't worry about it. But this curse is very interesting, so I kept it. Later, I found a corpse workshop to modify it, and it turned into a pretty good work. Eliza's fingertips rotated the ounce glass and smoothly received the clear wine. The clear and transparent aroma of the wine reverberated in the air, causing Vladimir to excitedly take off his sunglasses and sniff the fragrance. Vodka, Huaishi asked as he identified the mellowness that was so pure that it did not contain any fragrance. Then, she saw the tomatoes and celery coming out of the crisper box. The blood-like tomato juice was squeezed into the shaker pot and mixed with the vodka, faintly mixing with the pungent smell of chili. Then, lemon juice was squeezed in. Pepper powder, chili powder, all kinds of spices were used generously. In the end, a stalk of celery was mixed evenly, perfectly fusing the ruler's curse in the hand. In less than a minute, a glass of scarlet wine was delivered to Huaishi. The most suitable aperitif for you, Bloody Mary. Please, Miss Paper. Eliza smiled and studied his expression. In the blood-colored wine, there seemed to be endless darkness rippling. In a trance, the wonders and malice of the abyss emerged, making people shudder. When Huaishi picked up the wine glass, he could perceive what kind of balm and malice was contained in the glass. Once swallowed, the consequences would not be much different from swallowing lava, right? In the silence, Huaishi thought, and he felt that something was not quite right. Time passed by bit. Eliza was not in a hurry. She just looked at Miss Paper's contemplative look. After a long time, she reminded softly, "The best tasting time is almost over. Even if you're a novice, you should be mentally prepared, right?" Huaishi sighed, picked up the wine glass, and took a sip. In an instant, he felt the unique sour and sweet taste of fresh tomatoes erupt in his mouth, with the fragrance of spices, and it fell into his stomach like hot magma. Immediately afterward, Huaishi felt that his vision turned black, and he suddenly couldn't breathe. He subconsciously held the table for support. He fell into a daze. What kind of curse is this? Even the decaying dream origin substance could not affect him. His strength, agility, and even endurance were shaved off by a large portion the moment he swallowed it. Almost 1/5? He didn't even know what happened. The weakness came so suddenly that he didn't even have time to resist. If this was a game, he even suspected that there was a game designer behind the scenes who suddenly adjusted his character's game values. He couldn't even feel the curse state. It was so sudden that the situation had reversed. Grief, I call it that. Eliza leaned on the bar, looked at Miss Paper's pale face, and explained considerately, "You have to be careful. The curse left by the dead ruler is to make all things wither with him, and it is inevitable to pass away. Once touched, life, stamina, and origin substance will quickly disappear. The Continuation Academy couldn't deal with it, so they could only seal it in my body. Don't worry, what you experience is just the product of the blending. It can't even be considered an aftershock. It is reflected in your body. Every time you touch it, it will probably deduct 1/5 of your existing life. This is just an illusion formed by the erosion of reality. After an hour, it will collapse." She paused for a moment, revealing a dangerous smile. If you can persist in front of the table for an hour, victory will be yours. How much wine could a skilled bartender make in an hour? If it was Eliza, at full power, she could make at least 60 cups. Every time his body touched it, 1/5 of his life was deducted. After an hour, Huaishi's life would become the same as a paramecium. Not to mention continuing to drink, he probably wouldn't even have the strength to breathe. Not to mention the other disasters fused in the wine. Therefore, the number of contact must be reduced. In other words, Huaishi lowered his head to look at the remaining half of the cup of wine. He instantly raised his head and drank it all. In one gulp, he drank it all. Immediately, the inexplicable weakness came again, and Huaishi's stamina was drained again. Then, he felt as if his stomach had been punched by someone. Everything in front of him turned dark, and his eyes were burned red by the explosion of alcohol. He felt that he had swallowed a cup of hot lava. Right now, that ball of viscous fire was burning in his stomach, constantly ravaging his lungs. Don't underestimate vodka. This pure alcohol mixture is flammable. Today, I have prepared the water of life, which is comparable to nitroglycerin for you. Eliza looked at Huaishi's red cheeks, couldn't help but reach out and pinch it. She sighed considerately. If you can't drink it, you can admit defeat at any time. He had already shown mercy to his opponent, Huaishi. Otherwise, she didn't need to explain the principle of the curse. Of course, maybe this was also to bluff him, but Huaishi couldn't find any way to break it for the time being. This was the most unsolvable and straightforward way of fighting. The weakening of his life force brought about a rapid decline in his resistance to alcohol. Eliza didn't even need to poison him. When Huaishi's life force fell to 1/20th of the current level, he would be drunk to death in an instant, ushering in failure. In other words, he had to make her admit defeat before he fell. In the silence, Huaishi slowly raised his head and took a deep breath. He looked up. Next, it's my turn, right? Miss Huaiji grinned and asked softly like a beast looking at an enemy. Being looked at like that, Eliza's breathing paused for a moment. Then, Miss Huaiji picked up the sake in the box beside her and placed it on the bar counter. The glass and the solid would rubbed against each other, making a low and crisp sound. Sake, I haven't tasted it for a long time. Eliza sighed, but the sake itself, other than being cut, doesn't have any room to be processed, right? Moreover, if you just bought someone else's wine for me to drink, it can't be considered as a wine master's ability. Don't worry, this bottle of wine can be considered as one that I participated in brewing. And it's a work of painstaking effort. Huaishi's thumb stroked the cork of the wine bottle, and his expression became nostalgic. The moment his thumb lifted the cork, a clear and mellow wine aroma gushed out from it like a waterfall, turning into an omnipresent tide that spread in all directions. Just like a light rain in early spring, it silently moistened every part of his surroundings. He could feel the joyous vitality in the air. Right now, that vitality was resonating with the paper in front of Arisa, as if it came from the same source. Without a doubt, this was her masterpiece. Tingo Mountain's technique? That's amazing, Miss Huaiji. My impression of you has changed. Eliza was intoxicated by the fragrance of the wine. She opened her eyes and sighed solemnly. To be able to brew such an excellent wine, perhaps you are really an enemy that can defeat me. You flatter me. It's just a little work. Huaishi smiled and took out the porcelain bottle of sake from the box beside him. He tilted the bottle and poured the wine into it, about 200 milliliters. When his palm swept across the clay stove, a flame had already risen vigorously from it. Is this for warm-up? Eliza nodded in understanding. I usually like to drink cold, and it's not bad to drink warm sake once in a while. It's not sake, it's a cocktail. Huaishi corrected her. He raised his hand and pressed it on the porcelain bottle. Under the long glove, the steel arm cracked, and a faint flame appeared. Casting began. The flame on the clay stove suddenly rose violently, almost engulfing the container and the porcelain bottle in it. The so-called warm-up was originally a way to drink sake after it was warmed up. But now this sudden burst of terrifying firepower was as if it was going to boil the entire Qingjio. After it's completely boiled, the alcohol will be lost and it won't taste good anymore. Stop it. As a person who loved wine, Eliza widened her eyes and reached out to stop, but she was stopped by Huaishi's other hand. Miss Huaiji was smiling. Don't worry, Mississippi, the woman said. The modulation has just begun. Under her palm, in the dancing flame, the clear sake was quickly dyed scarlet. Like a burning flame, it was surging and fluctuating. Under the precise control of the alchemy fire, there was no loss of the alcohol composition, and the entire porcelain bottle had already ushered in a qualitative change under this water-refining alchemy. Time passed in a flash. When the expanding flame dissipated, Huaisha raised 2 fingers and pulled the porcelain bottle out of the water. The water in the container didn't even have any heat rising. All the heat was concentrated in the liquor. When Huaisha's fingers tilted, the blood-red liquor quietly flowed into the thumb-sized porcelain cup, rippling with light. It was like a melted gem. Please use it, Miss Eliza. The exquisite porcelain cup was placed in front of her, and Motoko Ji said softly, Special sake volcano. Chapter 656. A delicate porcelain cup was placed in front of Eliza. She reached out and picked it up. The wall of the cup was cold, and she couldn't feel any heat. But the dark red wine in the cup seemed to contain a terrifying heat, which made her scalp tingle. In silence, she sighed softly. To be honest, I thought you would delay the time. This was what Eliza didn't want to see the most. According to the rules, if both sides poured wine for each other in each round, Huaisha could slack off in his own segment. What's wrong with mixing a cup of wine for half an hour? Can't he strive for perfection? As long as he delayed a little longer, the effect of death of wounds would be broken. However, Huaisha's speed was faster than she had expected. Even in less than 2 minutes, the wine was poured, heated, and mixed in one go and came to her hand. It was like she couldn't wait to welcome the second round. Huaisha shrugged and looked at her expression. If I can't make you admit defeat in a fair and square way, you must have other means, right? You're so annoying, Miss Huaisha. You make it sound like I'm cheating. Eliza smiled mysteriously, lowered her head, looked at the porcelain bottle in front of her and the wine cup beside Huaisha, and asked curiously, Why are there 2 cups? It's too boring to drink alone, isn't it? Drinking with guests is a unique expression of intimacy in Yingzhou. Miss Huaisha held her cup in her hand and asked slyly, Although it doesn't make sense, Ms. Eliza, will you refuse? Of course not, Eliza replied calmly. With such a beauty drinking with me, who will choose to refuse? No more nonsense. She picked up the wine cup in her hand and drank it. Then, she felt the sharp pain of her skull cracking. Her body twitched involuntarily, her legs went soft, and she almost couldn't stand still. The palm holding the bar left a deep imprint in the solid wood. Pain. Intense pain burst forth from his skull, bringing with it an illusory force that seemed to have materialized. It was as if someone had placed an axe on his head. Immediately after, a terrifying pain spread through his body along with the wine that was just right warm. Everywhere it passed, all the coldness was dispelled, causing his entire body to become comfortably warm. What he swallowed was not a liquid, but a warm and fragrant mist. It was intoxicating, but at the same time, it was unbearable to endure the terrible pain of being chopped by the axe. Following the spread of the pain, an uncontrollable wave spread from the bottom of his heart. Eliza panted violently and supported herself on the bar counter. Her chest under the black vest rose and fell violently, and her expression gradually became distorted. His expression became ferocious. Because of anger, the anger that seemed to have materialized quickly spread throughout her body, filling up her entire body. Along with the pain and tipsiness, it rapidly expanded and gradually eroded her soul. It caused a rage that had condensed into a substance to break out of his body. Amidst the dead silence, faint exclamations could be heard from the audience. All the cooking demons raised their eyes in astonishment and stared at Eliza behind the counter. So beautiful, you're burning up. Huaisha picked up his wine glass, took a sip casually, and praised indifferently. Being yourself in the fire, Miss Eliza's burning appearance is really moving. That's right, Eliza was burning up. The rampaging origin substance was infected by her anger, and wisps of it seeped out of her pores and skin, turning into a scarlet glow that enveloped her. Across the bar counter, he could still feel the blazing heat. It was as if the lid of a furnace was opened. That was not Huaishir's anger, but the anger that was originally hidden in Eliza's body. What Huaishir did was at most sprinkle a spark of fire. Caught off guard, Eliza's anger was ignited from the inside out, causing her consciousness to shake instantly. She almost couldn't hold back and attacked the enemy in front of her. The sharp-hand knife stopped abruptly at the last moment. The 5 fingers that were entangled with the dark curse had a faint malevolence and curse. It was only a line away from Miss Huaishir's pupils. At the last moment, she managed to control herself. She didn't break the rules of the culinary demon duel. Otherwise, Eliza would have instantly been sent out. You really have a lot of firepower. There must be someone who made you so angry. Huaishir sipped his wine nonchalantly and raised his finger. A wisp of condensed flame slowly rose from the tip of his finger. That was alcohol. The alcohol in Huaishir's body was being ignited by his anger, quickly being metabolized. Thanks to Dai Tengu's miraculous hands, this brand new bottle of sake perfectly merged with Huaishir's blood. The vitality that belonged to a mountain ghost flowed within. If one were to simply use it, it was indeed an incomparably precious high-quality wine. Not only could it heal hidden injuries and increase vitality, but it also tasted wonderful and intoxicating. To Huaishir, this was also a material that was hard to come by. Apart from this, there weren't many things that could contain his origin substance so perfectly. The anger in his origin substance equipment was merged into it, forming a specially tuned volcano. If it was a normal person, wouldn't they have been burned to ashes by this kind of anger and heat long ago? Eliza actually only lost control for a moment and almost punched herself. Her eyes were scarlet red. In the silence, Huaishir picked up the porcelain bottle and poured wine for her again. She hadn't even finished drinking. "Do you want to continue?" Huaishir asked. Eliza didn't reply. She silently picked up the wine cup and once again drank it in one gulp. Once again, the blazing flames appeared. Every time she drank, she would experience the pain of her skull being shattered. That pain was simply too real, as if someone had really taken an axe and chopped off her neck, taking away her head. Under the sweet fragrance of the alcohol, her body burned with anger, and she slowly walked towards death. On the other hand, this didn't affect Huaishir at all. His own blood, his own origin substance, and his own wine. There was no reason that he would be poisoned to death after going out for a while. Instead, he used this opportunity to expel the alcohol that had accumulated in his body. He relied on the vitality of the plants and the wine to replenish his weak vitality. Even if it was only a temporary illusory state, he still relied on drinking to recover close to his original range. As the saying went, the other went away. Huaishir had turned the tables. When Eliza put down the porcelain cup in her hand for the last time, she couldn't help but let out a long breath. After the blazing flames were extinguished, she slowly regained consciousness. The pain quickly left like an illusion. "I actually got drunk," she sighed softly. "More or less. Don't alcohol and anger make people lose control?" Huaishir asked. "Can you continue?" "Of course." Eliza took out a handkerchief from the pocket of her vest and wiped the sweat from her face, fingers, and neck. After changing the burnt hairband, she regained her capable and experienced posture. She casually grabbed a handful of ice cubes from the freezer beside her and threw them in her mouth, chewing with crunching sounds. Finally, she regained her tranquility under the stimulation of the cold. The remaining ice cubes were thrown into the mixing pot, and then the ounce cup was flipped over with her fingertips. Rum, vodka, bourbon, gin, brandy were thrown in like flowing water. Just like at the World Wine Exhibition, dozens of different liquors were mixed together in the snow flask. Then, the ruler's curse turned into a whirlpool, mixing all the chaotic materials. When they fell into the wine cup with ice cubes, they turned into a clear and fragrant liquid, and no bomb-like lethality could be seen. A can of happy water was pulled off, and As Eliza's palm tilted, it was mixed evenly in the wine cup. She simply drank the remaining half herself. The empty can was thrown into the trash can next to her, and a slice of cut lemon was thrown into the cup, adding a seductive sour taste to the bitterness of the alcohol and the sweetness of the drink. In the end, the wine with ice mist was placed in front of Huaishur. The sweet smell lingered at the tip of his nose. "This is the wine that loses my virginity." Huaishur looked up with a half-smile and asked his opponent curiously, "Does Ms. Eliza have evil thoughts about me? Although you're my type, my principle is to never make a move on the guests, so, unfortunately, we don't have the fate that the people of Ingzhou say." Eliza shrugged and approached with a smile. "The second cup, Long Island iced tea, please, Ms. Huaiji." This was an extra-large cocktail that was directly placed in a beer glass. It was more than 3 times the weight of the Bloody Mary, just now, not to mention the terrifying lethality contained in it. Obviously, she didn't give Huaishur a chance to finish it in one gulp. Cocktails are something to be savored slowly. Eliza said happily, "Drinking in one gulp is too boring. You have to repeatedly taste the bartender's painstaking efforts and design. Unfortunately, I'm probably the kind of unwelcome guest." Ms. Huaiji shrugged, picked up the beer cup, raised her head, and opened her mouth. The muffled sound of water burst out from her throat. The beer cup was quickly tilted toward her open mouth. The oversized Long Island iced tea was poured directly into her stomach without swallowing. It was like filling a thermos. After she finished pouring the wine, Huaishur put down the wine cup and burped right in front of her with a happy smile on her face. Eliza was also looking at him, smiling even more happily than Huaishur. I was fooled. At that moment, a crimson color emerged from Huaiji's body and spread quickly. Then, faint water vapor rose from her body. It was as if her whole body was shrouded in mist. Huaishur widened his eyes in shock. His breathing was rapid. At this moment, he was sweating profusely, as the famous scumbag's happy wine. Even if Long Island iced tea tasted sweet and sour, it was essentially using the taste of happy water and lemon to cover up the internal alcohol content that was completely excessive. Not to mention the terrible lethality of the human digestive system that was several times greater when different wines were mixed together. Drinking it in one gulp seemed to avoid the weakening of the curse of death, but it made Eliza's alcohol bomb completely explode from the inside of her body. Huaishur froze in place, only feeling that his vision was quickly turning dark. Chapter 657. He opened his mouth subconsciously and wanted to spit it out, but he raised his hand to cover his mouth, clenched his teeth, and restrained the nausea surging in his chest. That was the body's instinctive rejection. But rejection wouldn't work. Sweat continued to flow, making Miss Huaiji's face gradually become wet. As his vitality plummeted again, Huaishur felt that the alcohol content in his blood vessels began to soar. Incomprehensible and unbelievable. Even this time, there wasn't even a transition phase at the beginning. Without warning, he directly entered a state of deep drunkenness. Until this time, Huaishur discovered that the alcohol brought by Bloody Mary was not metabolized as he thought. Even after the alcohol of Long Island iced tea was injected, it reappeared. It directly skipped the initial tipsy stage, and he fell into an uncontrollable drunkenness. I still underestimated the bartender's skills. Eliza's alcohol couldn't be metabolized. Instead, it was like a stack of poison. It would increase with each round of drinking until the upper limit of the rapid decline of the tolerance could no longer resist the erosion of alcohol. Then, everything would be over. I watched your previous matches. Your resistance is indeed very high, but this isn't something that can be ignored just because you can resist it. Eliza looked down at Huaiji Susie's embarrassed look and raised her eyebrows happily. After all, how to quickly get the guest drunk is the bartender's unique skill. Huaishur didn't respond. He was trying his best to resist the erosion of alcohol and the urge to fall asleep and faint. He had no time to talk. Eliza shook her head and sighed. She took out the iron box from her pocket. After opening it, She rummaged through the tobacco and cigarette paper. After skillfully rolling one out, she stuck out her tongue, licked the corner of the cigarette paper, and sealed it. "Do you want to smoke?" she asked casually, but Huaisher didn't respond. She shook her head and sighed. She tilted her head and lit it herself. After taking 2 puffs, she took off the cigarette and stuffed it into the corner of Hui Jisuzi's mouth. The strong smell of tobacco mixed with unknown powder made Huaisher's drowsy consciousness gradually wake up. "It was only temporary." "Surrender?" Eliza asked. "With your current state, let alone holding on to the next round, you can't even continue bartending, right?" Huaisher propped himself up in a short period of sobriety and absent-mindedness, scrutinizing his opponent, who was glowing with shadows. He smiled faintly. "It's not time to admit defeat yet. Besides, who says I don't have a solution? I don't hate stubborn girls." Eliza smiled, but before she finished speaking, she saw that in Huaisher's hand, a shorting zhou knife that was as short as a rib slowly appeared. The overlapping feathers of the blade had a scarlet, bloody light. It was so ferocious. In front of everyone, Huaisher raised his saber, turned the hilt, and pointed it at his neck. The main artery was stabbed. Eliza's expression suddenly changed, and she reached out to stop her. It was too sudden. She didn't understand why her opponent wanted to commit suicide when he couldn't win, but she instinctively didn't want to see blood on her workbench. She also didn't want this opponent who made her so happy to die for such a reason. But it was too late. The blade sank into Huaisher's neck. It pierced from the left and came out from the right. There was no scene of blood splattering as expected. It was as if it was just a toy to scare people. But now, Huaisher raised his hand as if nothing had happened. His eyes gradually became clear, and he was recovering his sobriety. Gradually, he returned to normal. Indeed, the alcohol in the blood couldn't be metabolized, so it was better to just let the blood and alcohol go. In this way, countless blood with the sweet fragrance of alcohol flowed along the resentment and flowed into the cage of dreams. Bit by bit, it was devoured by the crows. This excessive amount of alcohol, enough to intoxicate hundreds of people, was quickly drained from Huaisher's body. Then, it flowed to the innocent crows. Next, young Master Ming's hematopoietic function was activated. The huge vitality from the mountain ghost surged and quickly turned into blood. Huaisher took a deep breath, took off the cigarette from the corner of his mouth, and flicked the ash. "Thank you for the cigarette." Eliza's expression was unreadable. Going to the bathroom to vomit after getting drunk in the wine competition. "This is cheating, Miss Huaisher." "No, I'm just preparing the ingredients for today's last cocktail." Huaisher smiled slyly. "Besides, there's no rule that says you can't bleed yourself in the competition, right?" "Yes, these are the ingredients for today's last cocktail." Anyway, that's what he said. "As for the last cocktail, can't I change the recipe at the last minute?" Casually, he pulled out the resentment that had been washed by the good wine and put away the blood. Huaisher's other hand picked up the empty porcelain bottle again. After pouring in the sake again, he directly inserted it into the ice bucket. Then, the forging furnace was restarted. This time, what burst out was no longer high heat. On the contrary, countless chills were rapidly shrinking inward. The ice in the ice bucket melted at a speed visible to the naked eye. This was because the heat was being transferred from the porcelain bottle to the outside. It was still the water refinement in alchemy and the fluid transformation method in the foundry skill. The essence of disaster from hell was injected into it. Soon, the bone-chilling gray sake was poured into Eliza's wine cup. "Special sake," sang Ran. Huaisher smiled. "Let me give you a spoiler. This is a different feeling from anger. Be careful," sang Ran. Eliza lowered her head and stared at the gloomy and heavy color in the glass. Her brows slowly raised. It was indeed the color of Sang Ran. It was just that this color was really sad. In a trance, she suddenly felt sad. No matter how thick her nerves were, Eliza was still a woman. The gentler her nature was, the easier it was to feel hurt. After this involuntary sigh, she finally reacted, but the glass in front of her was already empty. Only a trace of coldness went down her throat the moment she absent-mindedly drank. With the cold wine fragrance, even the flames of the whole world couldn't extinguish the coldness and loneliness. The chill was spreading. Her movements were stiff in place. As if she was frozen, it was difficult for her to breathe. She was so sad that she couldn't control herself. The past that she couldn't forget once again floated to her heart with this coldness, bringing heart-wrenching sadness and loneliness. She tried to raise her wrist with difficulty, but when her knuckles rubbed against each other, it made a sharp sound. It was difficult to move. It was even difficult to breathe, because she was bound from the inside out. In the broken, mournful sound, the projection in her soul emerged. A dark and illusory chain broke through her lungs and extended from her body. It penetrated the joints, bound the muscles, surrounded the lungs and internal organs, and finally converged on the heart that was beating hard. It gradually shrank inward. Sorrowful Locke, not caring that Eliza couldn't continue drinking, Huaisher drank one glass after another, tasting the sadness and loneliness that once belonged to him. For this kind of thing, just one glass was enough. Any more wouldn't have any effect. But loneliness and sadness to this extent. It was really unexpected. Huaisher lowered his eyes. Behind the bar counter in front of him, countless chains had pierced out of Eliza's body, binding her layer by layer. They multiplied and spread crazily, almost enveloping the entire arena. Boundless and tyrannical origin substance rippled outwards, making it hard for everyone to breathe. Huaisher, who was close at hand, couldn't bear the aftermath of the sadness. He could only rejoice from the bottom of his heart that he didn't fight to the death with such an opponent, but had a chef-demon duel. Otherwise, the one who lost and died would most likely be him, right? Huaisher had always known that Eliza was a powerhouse, but he didn't expect that she could be so strong. Even among Tier 4, there were very few people who could be comparable to her, right? As expected of the explorer who won the Lone Wolf Medal, Ms. Eliza. Huaisher raised his head, drank the last drop of Sang Ran sake in the porcelain bottle, and sighed softly. This determination and this strength are really awe-inspiring. Bang! A shattering sound sounded. It was the wail of sadness being defeated. Cracks appeared on the countless chains, and the shackles of the sorrowful rope collapsed. In front of Eliza's raised eyes, an ocean-like torrent emerged from the emaciated body. The phantom of the skinny ferryman emerged from the torrent of the river Styx, looking down indifferently at the mortal world. In an instant, it disappeared without a trace with the rushing river Styx. Sharon. Roman genealogy, Tier 4, River Styx ferryman, Sharon. Eliza raised her eyes, took a deep breath, clenched her fists slightly, and the net of chains collapsed in an instant. Now, Huaisher could finally understand how she carried the ruler's curse, because this woman was really unreasonably strong. Just by relying on determination, he could defeat his own sorrow. Relying on her own strength, she could bear the ruler's curse. If you have such strength, why don't you go kill people and rob them? Why do you have to work? Huaisher shook his head with regret, feeling despair about this overly fantastical world. I have to admit, Miss Huaisher, Eliza raised her eyes and sighed solemnly. You are an opponent that I can't defeat with alcohol. From this round onwards, I will really start to use the bartender's means. Me too, Huaisher responded with a smile. I have found your weakness, Ms. Eliza. Then let's have a showdown, Miss Huaisher. Eliza smiled, raised her hand, and took off the ring on her left index finger. At that moment, darkness that was thousands of times stronger than before gushed out from her 5 fingers. The curse of death instantly shrouded the entire audience, making it difficult for everyone to breathe. And from the illusion of ashes, the ruler who had already died raised his eyes and stared at the mortal world. That was the reflection left behind by the last existence. Just its existence was enough to freeze people's horror. In the beer barrel in front of Eliza, the valve opened, and a cup of dark beer with pale foam appeared in the glass. And between the 5 fingers of Eliza's left hand and the small glass, endless malice appeared in the color of vodka. The sorrow was condensing into a curse. Together with the small glass, it fell into the dark beer. There was just a soft puff. That was the dull sound of death falling. Deep water. No, this is the abyss bomb specially customized for you. She stared at the smiling woman in front of her and said softly, "Please enjoy, Miss Huaishur. For a strong opponent like you, there should be such an honor." Chapter 658. A deathly silence suddenly descended. Outside the arena, even the cooking demons were speechless. That cup of pitch-black beer was placed on the counter, as if it occupied the center of the world, pulling everyone's gaze, not allowing them to look away. Just by looking, they felt a wave of drowsiness and drowsiness. This was just a weak influence that could not even be considered as a remnant wave. That precious and terrifying calamity had already been condensed into the cup of beer. Once it was released, perhaps not only the underground plaza, even the manor and the entire mountain would be swallowed by the aura from hell. It did not pursue deliciousness, but turned to extreme lethality and corrosiveness. This was without a doubt the abyss bomb. What is going on, Elder Jiangquan? Behind the curtain, the black-toothed official also panicked. Why would such a dangerous thing appear in the cooking demon duel? Quickly make them stop. Please forgive this one for not being able to do so. The old Quan Jiang bowed his head, expressionlessly begging for forgiveness. All of this is in accordance with the rules of the Imperial Cooking Demon Duel. Moreover, even if you want those two contestants to stop, they would definitely not be willing, right? The foreign cooking demons are all arrogant people who have no respect for their seniors. Who knows, they might offend Sir's jade body. Truly lacking in respect, I am representing the Emperor. Could it be that Elder Jiang Quan has no respect for the Emperor? Don't be too impudent. Then, another mocking voice rang out. Left and right, they are just trash who have never seen anything. Since they are the Emperor's emissaries, they should obediently straighten their backs and watch the competition. Such a weak person will probably not be able to stay in the general's tent for even a day. Vulgar martial artist, what did you say? Haven't I made myself clear enough? Could it be that you want me to recite a poem for you? In the quarrel between the two, Quan Jiang still did not have any expression. He lowered his head like a stone man, allowing both sides to mock and criticize him, respectfully nodding his head. And the competition continued. Truly terrifying. Miss Huaiji lowered her head, gazing at the abyss bubble floating in the pitch-black beer, feeling reverence from the bottom of her heart. I wonder how many deaths are needed to create such a spectacular scene? In the beer bubbles, countless withered corpses appeared for a brief moment before quickly dissipating. It was death, the remains left behind by death, the traces left behind by destruction. You should be able to understand, right? Compared to quantity, quality is the true essence. Now, in the darkness, he was like a demon in hell. Eliza smiled. Don't you want to taste it? If I had known, I would have cheated too. Huaishur sighed softly. He reached out and held the handle of the beer glass. He finally felt the evil consequences of his overconfidence. No matter what, we shouldn't give up the initiative. He had initially thought that it was a formidable opponent, but who would have thought that his opponent was no longer a formidable opponent, but a T-Rex in disguise? However, this was still within the acceptable range. How could the archaeological team order her to take a break and forbid her from entering hell again be someone easy to get along with? You'll suffer if you look down on others. This is a lesson. Eliza looked at her eyes and solemnly told her for the last time, admit defeat, Miss Huaiji. It's just a duel. There's no need to gamble your life. I don't want to kill you. Do you think so? Then my chances of winning seem to be a little higher. Huaiji Suzy smiled, raised her eyes, and told her, Thank you for your mercy, Eliza. But aren't you also looking down on me? Before she finished speaking, she picked up the beer glass. She drank the crystal of disaster that was filled with the purification of hell in one gulp. She embraced death. It was as if she had hugged the past countless times. The last malicious essence from the former ruler, the curse of death, erupted from Huaishur's body at that moment, and swallowed everything. His movements came to an abrupt stop. In his hand, the fragile beer glass silently weathered into dust. Only a drop of remaining wine fell to the ground, instantly corroding through the table, down through the iron and stone floor, and finally into the deep ground. It disappeared. The entire underground square was suddenly illuminated by a red alarm light, and a sharp and ear-piercing sound burst forth. The ultra-large depth stabilizer sounded an alarm that it could not bear the burden. Under the corrosion of this drop of wine, it could not maintain the depth of the reality. This can't be considered cooking anymore, right? In the audience stand, old cooking demon, Gua, shook his head and sighed. What's the difference between this crude use and a bomb? Why don't all the young people these days study their culinary skills? He raised his foot and casually kicked a bamboo basket under his feet, opening a gap. In the darkness of the bamboo basket, a huge shadow appeared. Immediately after, an invisible gravitational force pulled all the leaked abyss sediment and floated into the bamboo basket. Soon it was silent. In the silence, only Miss Y. Susie remained sitting in place. Under the slender body, the crisp sound of porcelain cracking could be heard. The face suddenly shattered. After the cracked face, darkness gushed out, turning into a violent waterfall that spread out. Endless disasters emerged from his body with the curse, causing Huai Shi's soul to tremble. It was drowned and began to slowly dissolve. On Huai Susie's exposed skin, countless ferocious eyes opened in an instant and looked in all directions. As the safety index soared rapidly, he felt the deepest pain from his soul. Solidification. He was rapidly solidifying. He had only swallowed a cup of beer, but the curse from the ruler had already wrapped around his soul. Even the crow tide couldn't touch it. It went deep into his bones and spread to every corner of his consciousness. The terrifying gravitational force was pulling at him. It was pulling him deeper into hell. Now, the crack leading to the abyss had been opened. Endless darkness gushed out of his broken body like a waterfall. It quickly polluted the surrounding environment. On the arena, the depth began to decrease again. It was as if he was pulling the entire arena, no, the entire mountain range, and even half of Nara into hell with him. After the cracked face, countless vines and flowers appeared and spread out along the crack, swaying and dancing. The strange plants that flourished in the abyss absorbed all the precipitation around them and grew rapidly. Behind Miss Huai Susie, her shadow was rapidly expanding and changing shape. It changed from a human to a more violent state. In the end, the violent shadow completely broke through the restraints of the arena and shrouded the entire underground space. A wild and violent aura covered everyone's heart. It was the form of Huai Shi falling into hell. But what kind of person could turn into such a terrifying state after solidifying? It was as if she wanted to devour the whole world. A terrifying aura slowly rose from the ever-changing shadows. Then, endless darkness gathered and condensed into a sacred and solemn crown and a bare back above the shadows. Inside Miss Huai Susie's empty shell, the soul that had merged with miracle was rapidly transforming into a disaster. The violent while sleeping in Huai Shi's soul was finally awakened. The existence called the End Dragon cast an indifferent glance at the mortal world. It was ferocious. Guards, someone come quickly. This is an emergency. Seal off the arena immediately. High up in the stands, a shrill and terrified voice was shouting, "Hurry up! Get rid of that damn thing before it solidifies." The door opened with a bang. The soldier monks, whose faces were shrouded in white, answered the summons. But their movements stopped abruptly, not only because of the cold gazes of the cooking demons, but also because of a wriggling arm that stretched out from the bamboo basket beside Guashuk's feet. It had a sticky texture like tentacles and was amorphous like liquid. But the slender arm was full of sharp teeth. Human teeth, beast teeth, insect teeth, fish teeth. All the teeth that humans could imagine were gathered on the liquid-like arm. It stopped in front of the soldier monks. The battle between the cooking demons is not over yet. The old cooking demon withdrew his gaze from the arena and looked back arrogantly. You guys, are you trying to interfere with the competition? Huh, you're not even as good as a girl. Don't come out and make a fool of yourself. Jeanne, she was still sitting in her seat. She did not scream or feel uneasy. She looked around blankly. It seemed that she did not understand what was going on at all. Miss YG Susie's sound and light effects are so powerful. Isn't she about to win? Why are you guys so panicked? This is not the place for you to flaunt your seniority. Gua shook. Behind the curtain on the stands, someone angrily questioned if Nara is hurt. Can you take responsibility? Your place has nothing to do with me. Gua shook raised his head, and a mocking smile appeared on his wrinkled face. To be exact to this old man, I don't need to feel pity for trash like you, who can't even be cooked. But this old man still mercifully saved you. He grinned and laughed arrogantly. Don't you Ingzhou people know how to be grateful? Old thing, what nonsense are you talking about? Idiots. The muscular cooking demon Flaminicule raised his head and glanced at them disdainfully. Look, even this sand barbarian can't stand it anymore. Guashuk laughed gloatingly. He did not pity them at all. Just as they said, Guashuk had saved them. Although this old ghost did not want to save anyone at all. But if this group of soldier monks rushed in and interfered with the battle between the cooking demons, it would be really bad. Once YG Susie lost control, except for a few cooking demons, everyone here would die without a burial place. Besides, it's not over yet, is it? Guashuk looked at the rapidly cracking and breaking figure. He laughed strangely, and his eyes shone with excitement. She actually swallowed them all? What enviable appetite. At that moment, in the arena, the broken silhouette that had been stiff for a long time finally raised its head in the darkness. Under the broken face, the corners of its mouth curled up slightly, as if it was smiling. It let out a long breath. Its lips opened and closed, silently praising its opponent. Good wine. Then, it was as if time had turned back. The waterfall of darkness that gushed out from Huai Ji Susie's body instantly froze in the arena. Then, it began to reverse and shrink inwards. All the flowers and plants that grew and multiplied welcomed the transformation as they shrank. Little by little, they merged with the darkness into the gradually closing silhouette. In the end, the crack closed. It was as if nothing had happened. It was just a short sleep. Her beautiful face was still perfect and flawless. Only behind her, the ferocious silhouette of the final dragon slowly opened its eyes. It took one last look at this shallow mortal world and withdrew its gaze in boredom. It quickly shrank back to its original shape. After a long time, Huaishir opened his eyes. He slowly woke up from this inverted dream that was comparable to a hangover. Under the illusion, the face belonging to him slowly curved up, and along with the paper in his arms and Suzy, a smile appeared on his face. The two pairs of completely different eyes overlapped and quickly became blurry. Then, Huaiji Suzy slowly raised her head and expressed her sincere gratitude to Eliza. Thank you for your hospitality. I am very grateful. Eliza didn't know if it was an illusion or something, but in the silence, she suddenly felt that in front of her, this opponent, who was originally like a beauty in a painting, had become alive. It was as if he had finally walked out of the painting. Is there any change? Her fingers flicked slightly under the bar counter, and she stared at the opponent in front of her, trying to distinguish any signs of solidification. But she felt that she couldn't see anything. If she felt that she was looking at an empty shell before, now she felt that this empty shell was hidden in the fog. She couldn't even determine whether the other party really existed. Thanks to you, I have grown a little, right? Huaishir smiled emotionally and looked at the remains of the beer glass in his hand. I'm really full. I'm afraid I can't drink anymore. This was a work created by the curse of grief, and it was indeed the abyss bomb. Once swallowed, it was as if a whole hell had exploded in his stomach. He was about to burst his limit, and even the crows in the cage of dreams were almost drunk to death. Even if he had a little more, he wouldn't be able to continue drinking. The disaster created by the ruler's curse imprint was too huge. Even Huaishur almost solidified several times in the process. But unfortunately, he lingered on the edge of solidification too many times. His experience was too rich. What was more coincidental was that he was wearing a smuff that was specially used to replace himself being eroded by the abyss. The non-existent phantom, Huaishur Suzy, welcomed growth in this disaster. It was just like those scam games that said something like elite transformation, spiritual base rebirth, first stage advancement, and so on. The old limitations were broken, and the value was increased. The degree of solidification of the phantom greatly increased. Unfortunately, the biggest change was also like a scam game. The card face was more beautiful. Day's cat, JP Janao. Eliza stared at this extremely strange opponent who couldn't see the depth of her strength and finally warned her, "I can make 3 more glasses of this wine." "I know," Huaishur Suzy said, "but you won't have the chance to make the next one. After this round is over, you will admit defeat." She repeated her words and smiled. A trace of awe-inspiring solemnity was revealed in the past coquettish and charming. "Because I have found your weakness." The forging furnace was activated again. This time, a pure and sacred light rose from the sake, illuminating the pair of dark eyes like the abyss. Just like this, she held the small wine glass with both hands and presented her final work so kindly and respectfully. "It's time for the sun to rise, Ms. Eliza." She asked, "Are you ready to welcome the dawn?" Chapter 659. It was a thin cup of wine that was called dawn. It illuminated Eliza's pupils, and the gentle and pure light was rippling in faint ripples without any lethality. Just by smelling it, one could feel the strong fragrance of incense. Holy praises surrounded her ears. Whether it was Eliza or the cooking demons outside, they were all stunned. Even if an acolyte were to look at it, they would be able to easily tell that there was no malice in it. In other words, it was simply a cup of medicinal wine for healing. But now, this thin light of dawn made Eliza fall into silence. After a long time, her eyes slightly raised. She sighed softly. "So despicable, Miss Huaiji. That's too sad. Do I look like such a despicable person?" Huaishur spread out his hands and asked doubtfully, "Although I was forced to swallow the abyss bomb, you see, there's actually no anger or resentment in this cup of wine. I hope it's that kind of thing. But I'm not that kind of person." Huaishur smiled. "Compared to blood debts, I prefer to repay evil with good. A long time ago, a big sister once told me that love can conquer everything, and I deeply believe it. Only by sharing generously and selflessly can I get the other party's reward. In the end, everyone was very grateful to me." He paused for a moment and said seriously, "I believe you will too." Being stared at by such a calm and warm gaze, Eliza did not feel relaxed at all. Instead, her whole body tensed up. It was as if she was being stared at by something terrible. She felt as if there was a knife at her back. Repay evil with good? Love conquers everything? Shared generously and selflessly? This kind of line would be outdated and jumped 20 years ago, but now it made people shudder. It was precisely because she knew what this cup of dawn represented that she could feel the hidden malice in it, even if this cruel and cold malice was not in the wine. This feeling of being caught in a trap of my own making is really not good. Eliza sighed self-deprecatingly. She raised her hand and held the small porcelain cup between Miss Huaiji's hands. Then, she drank it in one gulp. The clear amber liquid entered his throat, bringing with it a wonderful fragrance. The aroma hidden under the alcohol was gently aroused, and a thick fog of rich fragrance passed through his throat. In his stomach, a warm taste spread out, and his entire body felt warm. It was like soaking in a hot spring. Not only was her spirit refreshed, even the old injuries in her body began to heal quickly. Originally, it should be like this. If it was anyone else, it should be like this. Anyone but her, after she shed her gentle and harmless appearance. This overly sharp hypocrisy finally revealed its sharpness in her heart. Her expression stiffened for a moment, and she stood still, But right after that, the sharp sound of steel scraping against each other burst forth. Even though it was sealed off by flesh and blood, it became so oppressive. Eliza's body, in the astonished exclamation of the audience, a sharp sword of light pierced through her back obliquely, stained with sticky blood, and pointed to the ceiling. Then the second one. It pierced through the vest in front of her chest and came out from the position of her heart, cutting her arm. Wisps of darkness quickly flew out from the wound that had been pierced through, but it couldn't cover the huge flame running in her body. It was like the sun slowly rising at dawn. The tyrannical light swept away all the darkness and evil. The third one, the fourth one, the fifth one. The sharp sound was endless. In an instant, thousands of swords pierced through her heart. A large amount of blood spurted out from the broken body. The viscous scarlet flowed along the blade, almost completely covering the area behind the bar counter. The sharp sword blades intertwined with each other, becoming a cold cage. It almost completely tore her body apart. A beauty in such a tragic situation in an instant. Even the coldest person would not be able to bear it. They could empathize with this painful torture. The pure origin substance of the sword of virtue operated in Eliza's body, taking root and sprouting like a plant. It destroyed from the inside out in the most violent and decisive way. Except for a certain large husky, no matter how strong a creature was, its internal organs and intestines would not grow a carapace. In an instant, she suffered such a tragic injury. Eliza did not fall. She was still tenaciously standing. This might be a heavy injury to a fourth-level ascendant, but to her, it was not enough to threaten her life. Ascendants who had stepped into the star antimony stage had already become the incarnation of the sacred mark. To Sharon, who was wandering on the river Styx, the flesh and blood body was nothing more than a burden. As long as Eliza was willing, she could transform into a state of burning origin substance at any time and truly become Karen's incarnation. This kind of heavy injury was not worth mentioning. She stretched out her hand, holding the sword in front of her chest, and her 5 fingers slightly tightened. Between her 5 fingers, the sharp blade of light shattered and was pulled out by her, quickly dissipating into the air. Then, a second, a third, not long after, her hands, which were covered in cracks, pulled out all the blades from her body, crushed them, and threw them away. The bloodied Orisa raised her head, the wounds all over her body quickly closing. Her skin healed, her blood flowed backwards, and her internal organs returned. Apart from the tears in her vest and trousers, nothing else could be seen. Huaisher's attack had not affected her in the slightest, but this could not be considered an attack. At most, it was just a side effect of the treatment. "Are you feeling better?" Huaisher Susie asked with concern. "To be honest, it's terrible." Eliza lowered her head, staring at her healed hands. Her 10 fingers clenched slightly. A shattering sound came from within her body. A low sound, like the sound of a stone slab cracking, continuously rang out. It was as if the cracks in a thick mountain had begun to spread, and it began to collapse. After her illness was healed, she temporarily did not have the burden of her injuries, and her strength erupted without any hindrance. In an instant, a terrifying aura descended upon the arena. It was as if the ferryman of the underworld river had personally arrived, coldly selecting the souls in front of him. She had become even stronger. She no longer had the burden of the curse. Under the cleansing of the origin substance of the virtuous sword, the curse entangled in her bone marrow was completely swept away, and the damage it had caused was negligible. It did not cause any damage. It could be said that it had gently helped her sweep away the evil energy in her body. Huaisher had healed his enemy, but now, this recovery had caused Eliza to stand on the edge of a cliff. On the silver bracelet on her right wrist, a blood-colored gem slowly lit up, emitting a red warning light, repeatedly reminding her of just how dangerous her current situation was. This was the destruction brought about by kindness and love. At the same time, it was also Eliza's greatest weakness. She had given Huaisher too many opportunities. She was too soft-hearted towards beauties, but at the same time, she was too confident in her own skills and strength. Indeed, Karen's strength allowed her to calmly retreat even when facing a fifth-level ascendant. When traversing the infernal realm, she would never get lost because of the depth, and her outstanding skills made her even more powerful, allowing her to retreat unscathed after entering dangerous ruins several times. But the premise of all this was that she had not been cursed by the ruler. Thanks to him, the current Eliza had been forced to rest and could not enter any infernal realm. Even the Continuation Academy was unable to resolve the curse that had penetrated deep into her bone marrow. They could only make both sides coexist in a balanced state after modifying her. Not long ago, she looked like she had been infected by a curse. That was the safest state she could be in. But now, a slight tilt appeared on the balance that had been carefully maintained. A friction that should not have appeared in the complicated and harmonious mechanical structure. The moment this reckless kindness healed her, the balance was broken. An ant's nest appeared on the dam. As for how serious the consequences would be, it might not necessarily be. At most, it would only weaken the seal on the curse slightly. But this was enough to trigger a state of alert. If she dared to use any cooking demon skills again, the loophole in the seal would rapidly expand and extend. Once the balance was broken, the tilt would only become faster and faster, and in the end, there would be no room for recovery. The ruler's curse would be completely leaked. At that time, not only herself, but even the entire Nara would be implicated. This was not a crisis that a cup of abyss balm could compare to. In the silence, Eliza sighed and suddenly said, "I can still continue." "I know." Fleischer nodded. "You are in excellent condition now. If you want to decide the victor, I have absolutely no chance of winning. However, when it comes to shameless fighting, I am very confident." He thought for a moment and raised 3 fingers. "If you don't care about the consequences, then I don't have to worry about it." Miss Fleischer told her, "I can last 3 rounds before losing." Eliza was unmoved. "Even if the curse is leaked, it might not be as bad as you think." "I also know." Fleischer nodded. "At best, there is a hidden danger. You have the possibility of winning 90%. No, more than 90%, but your sense of responsibility will not allow you to bear the consequences of failure." Speaking of this, he couldn't help but sigh. "I'm sorry, Ms. Eliza. Although moral kidnapping is despicable, it is really useful for people like you." Eliza did not answer. Perhaps, compared to the ruler's curse, this was Eliza's biggest weakness. From the beginning, when she revealed that she was a member of the archaeological team, Fleischer already knew. It was true that many of the explorers in the abyss were lunatics with deep self-destructive tendencies and lunatics thirsting for disaster. But at the same time, there were also a large number of people who were not like this. Instead, they chose to go to hell with the love of this world in their hearts, a dignified fourth-order sublimator, the elite and elite of the archaeological team, actually worked for this kind of trash for money. Even in the face of an opponent like himself, she repeatedly showed mercy. This Ms. Eliza was too gentle. In the end, was this weakness caught? Eliza laughed self-deprecatingly and shook her head. She raised her hand and took out a bottle of whiskey from the wine cabinet. She raised her hand and casually poured it into a glass. After the burning pine wood flashed past, it coated the wine with a light layer of smoke. Finally, she casually threw 2 cherries into the glass. She didn't use any cooking skills at all. It was just an ordinary bartending. She placed it in front of Fleischer. "Until the end, I still haven't let you taste the real bartending. It's a bit unreconciled to just leave like this, so I'll treat it as a gift. Try it." She picked up a glass and drank it in one gulp. Fleischer was stunned for a moment. He picked up the glass and sniffed it carefully. The fragrance of pine wood and the unique peat smell of whiskey mixed together, and the marinated cherries exuded a sweet smell, making the fruity and floral fragrance even more rich. It was unbelievably fresh. When tasting and sipping, he could feel the strong taste of whiskey and the sweetness of cherries spreading in the mouth, slowly swallowing. In the end, The slightly sour taste brought by the chewing of cherries perfectly covered the slightly bitter aftertaste of the whiskey. It's really a good wine. Fleischer couldn't help but exclaim, "What's the name?" "Let me think. Let's call it Smoky Cherries." Eliza smiled. "How does it taste?" "Wonderful." Fleischer nodded in agreement. This was a field that his half-baked wine couldn't touch. "Anything else?" he asked. "You have to drink in moderation. If you really want to be happy, one glass is enough. Besides, the competition is over, isn't it?" Eliza smoked and suddenly smiled slyly. She leaned close to his ear and whispered softly, "Actually, you also exposed a weakness, Miss Fleischer. I've heard Lucian talk about the similar source substance in that glass of dawn many times. It reminds me of your background, the ivory tower, and your skills." At that moment, Fleischer was stunned. Eliza, on the other hand, had already seen through his deepest disguise and saw the secret that he wanted to hide. She whispered softly in his ear with a smile, "I really didn't expect that you were Fleischer." In an instant, Fleischer felt like he was struck by lightning. He almost didn't hear the second half of her sentence. "Mistress, right?" A bolt from the blue flashed. After the feint, Fleischer only felt countless question marks rising from his head. He was stunned. "What are you talking about?" Widening her eyes in disbelief, Miss Fleischer opened her mouth in shock. She was stunned for a long time before she reacted. She didn't know whether she should be angry or glad. She could only raise her hand and point at her face in grief and indignation. "Do I look like a mistress to you?" "Who knows?" Eliza smiled strangely and sighed. "I didn't expect a beauty like Miss Fleischer would fall in love with such a scumbag." How is Mr. Fleischer a scumbag? He doesn't even have a girlfriend yet." When it came to his reputation and 18 years of innocence, Fleischer refuted angrily. But then, he saw Eliza's eyes became more and more strange. She looked at Miss Fleischer in front of her, and the corners of her mouth slowly raised. "Soon, Takashi, you still say that you don't know martial arts?" Fleischer couldn't spit out a mouthful of blood. He couldn't defend himself. "What is this? I'm seducing myself?" Refuting is guilty, and not arguing is admitting it. Both sides are blocked. Anyway, the title of mistress is really dead. Can't you bunch of onlookers have some conscience? However, I won't use this to threaten you. I'm already in my 30s. What haven't I seen? Don't be embarrassed." Eliza raised her hand, patted her shoulder, and said earnestly, "However, you have to be careful. All the gifts given by fate will be secretly marked with a price. Some men look pure, cute, and serious, but in fact, once they take off their clothes, you don't know what kind of big-tail wolf they are. Miss Fleischer, a beauty who looks cold, but is actually pure, is the easiest to be played by that kind of scumbag. Sorry, I haven't fallen to the extent of falling in love with a smuff. Please don't worry about it, and don't say that I'm a pervert, okay?" Fleischer was speechless. He could only be silent awkwardly and look into the distance. He silently mourned his reputation that had fallen into the abyss. He cried silently in his heart. After all, if there was a choice, who would want to be a mistress? Then, Big Sister Bartender's relationship consultation ends here. Finally, Eliza raised her finger and handed over a business card. She winked at her. "If your feelings are hurt, you are welcome to complain to me at any time. By the way, you are my type, so I can give you a discount." That rather hot and appreciative gaze made the back of Fleischer's head jump, and he felt cold all over. But on second thought, it didn't seem to be a bad thing, right? Why can't I stick close to the blonde big sister when I'm pregnant? When he reacted, he seemed to have accepted the business card. Eliza had already patted the table, causing the workbench to shrink instantly and return to the rapidly closing suitcase. She took a coat from the last clothes hanger and put it on to cover the wound left by the sword. She picked up the suitcase and left. "Hey, Eliza, where are you going?" Just outside the arena, in the audience, the middle-aged man with a livid face couldn't help scolding in unison. "What the hell are you doing? Could it be that you've been bribed as well?" "Sorry, boss, as you can see, I can't win against her." Eliza shrugged calmly. "Even if you are not happy, please don't slander my professional ethics, okay? You can obviously win. Yeah, but if I win, it doesn't mean that you will win. Eliza sighed. If I continue to fight with her, even if I win, half of Nara will completely disappear. Do you know what the consequences of such an ending will be for you? You. Riken Mickey's expression twitched, and he couldn't speak. Don't worry, I will refund you half of the money. But the credit card part can't be refunded. If you doubt it and want to get it back, I can only wait for my next month's salary to pay you back slowly. Goodbye. She waved her hand calmly and said goodbye to her employer. Eliza left the arena suavely, all the way through the corridor, walked out of the basement, and politely declined Riken's offer to drive her back. She walked out the door and turned the corner. Then he suddenly bent down and supported himself against the wall. Then he vomited. Ugh! The undigested matter with a strong smell of alcohol fell to the ground awkwardly and piled up into a pool. Wisps of vicious black smoke lingered around it, and something was wriggling in it. It was faintly bloody. In the end, after vomiting, her makeup was a little messy. She took out a tissue from her pocket, wiped the tears, snot, and dirt from the corners of her mouth. Then she took out a bottle of water and skillfully rinsed her mouth. She lit a cigarette and finally breathed a sigh of relief, showing exhaustion. The most important rule of drinking to determine the winner. Maintain your poise until the last moment. In the end, I almost capsized in a dish. If I knew it, I wouldn't have tried to be strong. Wouldn't it be over if I just admitted defeat? She helplessly gave advice in hindsight. She smoked, gritted her teeth, and endured the twitching of her internal organs. Life was like a play, and it all depended on acting skills. The damage caused by Huaishur in the first 2 rounds was far greater than he had imagined. After all, not everyone had the terrifying abyss endurance and recovery ability of a certain coward. Moreover, not everyone's head could be intact after being hit by the axe of wrath more than a dozen times, sealed by the rope of sorrow, and repeatedly pierced by the sword of virtue. Heavy injuries. It was a serious injury. Fortunately, the opponent was still young and was fooled by her. Unfortunately, it still didn't change the final result. Eliza shook her head helplessly, took out an old-fashioned folding phone from her pocket, and dialed the emergency number. Hello? Is this the Continuation Academy? Your broken seal has leaked. Yes, it's the same as my aunt bleeding. Come and pick me up. The moment the phone hung up, a light fell from the sky. She disappeared on the spot. 2 seconds later, another light fell from the sky and swept away the vomit on the ground. There were no more traces in front of the gate of the Rigian family's manor. Only the cigarette that fell on the ground calmly flickered, and the smoke dissipated in the wind. Just like that, holding on to the last of her poise and elegance, the bartender Eliza left. Imperial Chef Demon tried it out. The winner, Huaishur Suzy. Chapter 660. There was an anxious atmosphere in the quiet room. During the long wait, Rajian Bujing sat in his seat, holding the phone in his hand in annoyance. There were several times when he couldn't help but want to call and urge him. But in the end, he endured it. He tried his best to restrain his ugly expression and calm himself down, but sweat continued to seep out from his forehead. He was anxious. He resisted the urge to get angry and forced himself to wait, until the sound of low footsteps came from outside the door. The young samurai pushed the door and entered. Rajian Jiojing knelt respectfully on the tatami and bowed his head to greet Rajian Bujing. Thank you for waiting for so long, uncle. Jingjiang. What are you doing, Jiojing? Rajian Bujing subconsciously wanted to get angry, but in the end he took a deep breath and asked anxiously, what should I do? That person is not like what you said at all. What the hell is going on here? Now someone has asked me to give up the shares and position of the Kansan group. That's not what we said at the beginning. It's just a group of fence-sitters who want to add insult to injury. For uncle, this is just dust falling from the roof beam. Don't worry about it. You just need to calm down and wait for the limelight to pass. But what about that bastard Zhenshi? Rajian Bujing asked angrily. I personally ordered people to threaten her. Can this matter be settled? No. I have to go and lie low for a while. I can go to America or the Russian Federation. Jingjiang, you must have connections. Hurry up and arrange it immediately. I can help you there. It's not that bad yet, uncle. Jiao Jing raised his voice and interrupted his words. He finally raised his lowered eyes. A ray of sharp light shot out from his slender eyes, like a sharp blade, making Rajian Bujing's expression stiffen. "Please don't worry. Uncle, you are harmless." He still said respectfully, "They won't do anything to you, and neither will Zhenxi. In fact, a person like you is really useless. If you encounter any trouble, you can just surrender and resign from your current position. Take the money you have earned over the years and find a small place to retire. No one will think you are a threat." In the silence, Li Jiao Yojing's expression twitched. The hands that fell on his knees pinched the custom-made suit into ugly creases. His face was ashen. "Jingjiang, I'm your biological father," he angrily rebuked. "Don't you know anything about gratitude? My name is Richimi Kushizu, uncle. My father is Richimi Kushizu since 8 years ago, when you gave me away for the sake of power." Seeing that Jiao Jing was still calm, his tone didn't fluctuate at all. He just told him flatly, "Since you've already obtained power, please don't be sentimental about the things you've sold. Now the things that come to this point, what was the point of talking about something as laughable as gratitude? Aren't you the one who asked me to serve my foster father like my own father?" Rijian Bujing gritted his teeth, the veins on his forehead bulging. But as he stared at his own son, he did not have the strength to be angry. He asked softly, almost as if he was begging, "Why? Why are you so heartless, Jing River?" "Then, thank you for your hospitality. I'll take my leave now, uncle." Jiao Jing slowly got up and bowed. Just before he left, he looked back one last time and told him, "Don't worry, as long as you stay here obediently, nothing will happen to you. Just take it as the last benevolence your former son is showing you." The paper door was pulled shut. The low sound of footsteps gradually faded into the distance. In the quiet room, Richimi Bujing sat paralyzed on the ground, stunned. He didn't have the strength to get up. His face was ashen, until the footsteps outside the door sounded again. He was stunned for a moment. Then he got up in surprise, pushed open the door, and rushed over. "I knew you would come back, Jing River. You wouldn't let go of your biological son." Outside the door, the female attendant whose wrist was grabbed by him was stunned. She stared at him blankly. "Mr. Bujing, Master Jiao Jing ordered me to clean up the corridor. I'm sorry, I'll leave now. Sorry to disturb you." She couldn't help but panic when she was stared at by the pair of eyes that were gradually turning ferocious. She ran away pathetically. In the silence, Richimi Bujing was left alone on the ground. His expression gradually became distorted. Both of you are like this. One day, all of you will pay the price." He roared angrily at the empty corridor. "Do you think that the shameful things you have done can escape the eyes of others?" No one responded. Only after a long time did he finally calm down. He made up his mind. Escape. He had to escape from this house. After losing his power, this place had become a tiger's den. Even his former biological son would abandon him like a worn-out shoe. He had never expected his so-called family to be merciful. After making up his mind, he hurriedly left. He called the driver. 10 minutes later, a car silently drove out of the back door and disappeared into the night. "We're not going to the capital. We're going to Sanchong." Richimi Bujing calmed down and ordered the driver. Then, he took out his phone and dialed a number. Fortunately, he had cultivated many subordinates in other places. Otherwise, he didn't know how tragic this situation would be. He couldn't stay in the Richimi family anymore. He didn't even want to stay in Yingzhou. He would go to Sanchong, then go through the border transit and change his appearance. After a while, he would let a substitute dress up as him and go to the Russian Federation. Then, he would go directly to America from Shinji Port. Once again, he saw the sparkling and majestic ocean, the source of all consciousness, souls, and wisdom in the world, the endless silver ocean. That unknown light led him to look down. His gaze penetrated the deep sea, illuminating the incomplete form of the White Queen. That magnificent and huge silhouette was quietly sleeping in the deepest part of the ocean. Just like the extinguished sun, the sun seemed to have extinguished. The moon rose from the sky. It was like a huge ball, round, just like when it was young. The faint light shone on the stone. The stone was white, and the water was black. The wild grass and flowers in the courtyard emitted the fragrance of vegetation. There was the light of fireflies in the grass. The wind blew in the distant night. She sat in a rocking chair, looking around blankly. Soon, she realized that this was her dream. Lucid dream? The internet said that there is such a thing, right? She scratched her head in confusion and looked around the old wooden house behind her. Indeed, this was the place that left the deepest impression in her memory. In her childhood, when her grandmother and father were still alive, this was the small courtyard and house that protected them. Although it would occasionally leak when it rained, the sound of the water falling on the copper basin would be crisp. It was like a symphony. Symphony was a word she learned later, but she had never heard it once. It should be very powerful, right? Miss YG seemed to know it very well. When she thought of this, she saw the figures sitting under the wooden porch under the moonlight. She looked up at the moonlight in the sky alone. The moonlight also became thinner, falling into her eyes, making her eyes glow. She was stunned for a long time, and then nodded in realization. Miss YG was also in the dream. That was great. She suddenly felt happy. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.